Whoosh, 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 whoosh. We're live. This is a friendly face here. Friendly face of Josh
Feels
Larky.
good. We're back in action. We moved this up a little bit. We were going to go a little later in August. Got to give the people something a little earlier.
I was like, you know what? The thing is, I know you're a full-time football guy. So I'm like, you've been looking at Dynasty. You've been analyzing best ball. Like, you've been all in for months. I'm like, we can just talk now. Like, let's go, you know?
Yeah. I was like, my full top 150 fantasy rankings aren't done, but I was like, I can get you those targets, those fades. I sent some stuff over to you. I know we're going to talk about a certain Chargers receiver we're different on. So I'm looking forward to this. Yeah.
Is there a Charger? I wonder what Josh Palmer? You must be bullish on Josh Palmer then. I actually think that Josh Palmer is an interesting case in that he was a 7th round pick by the end of the summer last year, if you remember. 7th round on Underdog. Remember?
Oh God. I mean,
he had moved up to I swear to everyone, check my math on this. Anybody in the chat? 7th round on Underdog for Josh Palmer at the end of August.
Well, I remember when we talked about him 2 years ago and he was drafted to the Chargers and I was at Player Profiler. You were like, what do you think of Palmer? I was like, I mean, I don't even know anything about this guy. And then I dug in and I was like, you know what? I think he's a pretty bad receiver, but because he's on the Chargers, he might be okay. And then he had almost 800 yards last year. So
he had 800 yards.
Good for Josh Palmer.
Josh Palmer, he's an average player, and that's what you're going to do. You put an average player in that situation, we're going to have that much pass volume opportunity with players that are going to be in and out of the lineup with lower body injuries inevitably around you. I mean, the fact that he didn't do more was such a glaring indictment that no one wants anything to do with him, unlike anyone I've ever seen. Like, I thought people soured on Gabriel Davis. I mean, Gabriel Davis was going a couple rounds even earlier than Josh Palmer by the end of last summer. He's going 4th round at the end of last summer. In fact, there was a brief moment because they played on Thursday Night Football, right? Was it Bills-Rams?
That sounds right.
I believe it was Bills-Rams on Thursday Night Football, and then there were FFPC drafts in the weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Gabriel Davis had a big week 1, and he was pushed up into round 2 and 3 in these FFPC drafts after the big game. And remember who else was pushed up? Darrell Henderson.
Oh, that's right.
Henderson was pushed up. Remember this? Remember, it's all coming back to you now.
It's hard for me to think about because the one that I always remember is, I think was 2 years ago when Amari Cooper had his massive game and then was going in like the late 1st.
Well, that's not even the best example. The best example was the year before that was Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a rookie.
Oh, against the Texans. That's right.
Yeah, he goes out. He puts up 20-plus fantasy points in week 1, and people were drafting him over McCaffrey. He went at the 101 in the FFPC drafts that weekend.
Yeah, he had do you remember that? It was that jump cut. He had that one jump cut on his touchdown run, and people were like, this is the shiftiest running back in all of fantasy football.
He looks great. Look how shifty. Look at the vision. Dude, you have to admit, man. I mean, I've had moments where that season there was Edwards-Helaire with that the jump cut, and then also there were these incredible videos shared on Twitter where Jonathan Taylor had a clear lane to his left, and instead of cutting left into open space, he cut right into a defender. He cut back into a defender instead of bouncing it outside.
I remember that one.
And everyone's like, against the Jets, and everyone's like, well, he has like Trent Richardson level vision. And then so they were comparing him to Trent Richardson, and they were comparing Edwards-Helaire to, Brian Westbrook. And I'm sitting there with like the strongest take of my life that Taylor's better than Edwards-Helaire, going, well, I just gotta run the clock out on this. You never know.
That was a scary week. I actually thought we were segueing just to the Chargers, and then somehow this became JTCEH. I thought you were going to say,
Doesn't it
man,
always?
even I thought you were going to be like, man, a pretty terrible receiver on the Chargers. 70 catches, 750 yards. Anyone can do it, even if they're terrible, like Josh Palmer. But I guess we then pivoted to running back.
We pivoted right to where it always ends up, where
It always does.
all roads lead to Jonathan Taylor versus Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And yes, Josh Palmer he did not have 800 yards. He had 769 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he was the wide receiver 42 in fantasy football. 37, actually, in total points, wide receiver 42 in points per game. He was useless. He didn't help you. He had no upside. It was a wasted pick, but he did have some production. Let's see, in terms of usable weeks, he was the wide receiver 25 in week 3. He was the wide receiver 10 in week 9, and he had a 30-point week. He had a 30-point week, week 11.
I remember he had the one big week, yeah.
Against the Chiefs. Rookie Trent McDuffie goes out, puts up 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's out there. That kind of game is hanging out there for Quentin Johnston. I'm not saying he can't have 100 yards. I'm not saying he can't have multiple touchdowns. I'm just saying that if the odds that he does that for a full month, like Christian Watson, nah, man. Not happening.
Christian Watson had a touchdown a game. I was digging into it. He had 6.5 targets a game during his starting stretch, which is Cortland Sutton.
I'm very listen, man. We're gonna get into it. We're gonna get into this. Mm-hmm. I'm terrified of Christian Watson. Okay, the argument for Quentin Johnston is that you can draft players like that based on upside, and you really shouldn't be too worried about the floor in rounds 6 and beyond. Just shoot your shot, man. And that's fine, but there's still an opportunity cost of does player X have actually more upside than player Y that you're considering? So that's more of the calculus. It's not necessarily the risk. It's more, I just feel like this guy's upside is not what people think it is, and this other guy, say Zay Flowers, has more upside. Like that's the way I think about it in the mid to late rounds. In the early rounds, and you could say Christian Watson is an early round pick, I care about risk. I treat these picks as precious in the round 3 and round 4, and I can't take these kinds of risks, man. The Jordan Love risk and the small sample risk and the touchdown regression risk, which isn't a risk, it's a certainty for Christian Watson, plus the target competition risk in the form of Jaden Reed. Hey. Like, it's not fun to go out and fade a player everybody's excited about.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff with Christian Watson that's going to drop. I one of my favorites is how people are like, have you seen how incredible his yards per route run is? And the first thing I always think is, you remember when he dropped the obvious breadbasket touchdown in week 1, and then you didn't hear from him for like a month and a half? I mean,
that's part of the reason you didn't have as many routes run in the denominator of that metric.
I was like, if you're Aaron Rodgers deep threat, we saw that all the time with Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Like, Rodgers throws a good deep ball. That player's going to have some spike weeks. In Christian Watson's case, like you said, there was nobody else there. There wasn't a second round pick like Jaden Reed knocking on the door. And people go, well, Rodgers looked like he was falling off. And I'm like, I don't know. Every game trotter I've seen, obviously no one thought Rodgers last year was a Hall of Famer in terms of how he did last year. But every game charter I was looking at across all the major websites, they think Rodgers was pretty good. So I'm like, if you didn't like these stats, and Rodgers, given the situation, there's a lot of offensive line injuries. We talked pre-show that it's an aging unit. When you start to stack everything up, it's like, okay, if we're going to have an offensive line that's one injury away from being bottom 10, we have the youngest skill group in the NFL. We have a defense that's actually really good. The Packers are going to be in a ton of like 20 to 17 games. And then you have 2 very good running backs in Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Where does Jordan Love come into this? How is he fantasy relevant? How does he help someone like Christian Watson, who's running deep downfield when he's a pressure sensitive quarterback? Anytime the offensive line's not very good, sorry, Christian Watson, you're literally like scripted out of the playbook for your 9 routes. I'm pretty concerned because
the playbook in Green Bay is hide and sneak, right? That's what it is. The Jordan Love playbook is hide and sneak. We got to hide this guy as much as we can. We got to put the least amount on his shoulders as we possibly can. And then we maybe do some quarterback sneaks. Like, can we maybe get him on the run, get him rolling out, get him some easy pitches and catches to the running backs and the tight ends. But everything we're saying, not Christian Watson, right? Not featuring Christian Watson. It doesn't add up, man. I don't understand how the math adds up, especially when you look at the game log and it was literally a 4-game stretch where all the production happened.
Yeah, one thing that we've talked about extensively in the past is the importance of team offense. And I feel like a lot of my misses when I was at Player Profiler where I'd be like, God, I love this offense. Let's pick these 2. And then it's like, well, it turns out actually all 3 of them. Sorry, you should have just picked all 3. And I feel like the opposite is true, where if you don't like the offense, it is very difficult to spend early round draft capital, especially on a receiver, when you don't like this offense. And
part of the reason
I think
I can't be all in on
that.
Olave, right? I wish I could be more all in on Olave. I can't be as all in on Olave as I want because not only do I hate the offense in New Orleans, I hate the whole division. The whole division is just a transfer pile. That's all it is, man.
Mm-hmm.
You can't.
Yeah, the Saints
how are you
have
going to
the
score
easiest
fantasy
schedule.
points in that environment? I just don't get it. So, and then when people trying to,
so
give
where
me
where would you rank Olave? Like, do you think he's a 3rd round pick?
I
then?
would rather get Olave in the 4th round,
Wow.
but he's never there. He's not there. Yes, in the 3rd round, I like him, but then there's a lot of good players in the 3rd round, and there's a lot of players on better teams in the 3rd round. I would draft him just because he's Olave. But what's the difference? What's the big difference between Olave and Terry McLaurin, for example?
So I definitely like Olave more. Maybe I can sell you on Olave. I think McLaurin's kind of boring as well. But with Olave, at least, I would imagine you like Garrett Wilson enough that you don't think it's wild that he goes in the 2nd round. Maybe you think he should go late 2nd. I'm open to that.
I don't like Garrett Wilson either.
But I assume you don't think Wilson's a 4th round pick as well. Obviously, he has a better quarterback.
No.
But Olave actually had a higher target share on a higher depth of target than Garrett Wilson by like quite a bit. I remember digging into it. Like Olave was actually running like his average depth of target was nearly Gabe Davis, which I thought was pretty incredible.
Oh, he was a downfield threat. There's no doubt about it.
So I think for me, I trust Carr more than I trust Jordan Love. And I think Olave has 13 or 14 games in a dome, which is definitely conducive.
You have dome games.
Yeah.
You've got a defense that's aging and they're not backfilling with talent. The only thing that's working against him is that this division is going to be a lot of low-scoring games. And the schedule's not great, and Michael Thomas is healthy. So I don't love it for Olave. He's the one guy. I mean, he's literally the one receiver I've talked about that I even will draft from the NFC South. Like, I can't even draft another. Like, I don't even want any of them, like, except Godwin.
Yeah, I think.
Right? Like, I like Godwin. Olave. I like Godwin too. But again, McLaurin, Godwin, these guys are available later than Olave. But it's like in the 3rd round, who do you draft? That's where Christian Watson goes. I don't want. What about Jerry Jeudy?
I like Jeudy. So I made a tweet about him yesterday. People got pretty pissed because I was just like, he played 12 games where he didn't get hurt. And people were very angry that I took those games out. I generally think that we shouldn't assume injuries for young, talented receivers. Other people may disagree, but in his 12 healthy games, he played 15. 12 of them, he played more than like 20% of the snaps. In those 12 games, he averaged 16 fantasy points a game on the lowest scoring offense in the entire NFL. So I think if we're looking for a guy in that range, because I agree, it does feel like kind of a dead range. The first two rounds look astronomically better than third and fourth.
I know.
More so than in other years.
I know. And again,
but I think
Olave's the best of
is
them.
there.
He's the best in the third round of all these guys, right? Which is part of the reason why I'm like talking myself into tight end in that round, talking myself into running back in that round, talking myself into these other positions. I mean, Derek Carr was atrocious last year, and he had Devontae Adams, but he's not that old. He's only 32 years old, and they did sign him to a solid contract. Not the biggest contract, but more than I thought he was going to get. Right? When a team gives up on you, you don't expect another team to sign you for that amount of money. $150 million over 4 years. But the guaranteed money is only the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think with that situation, Carr didn't play well last year, but it was also, I mean, this team won 6 games. It's hard to be motivated. The offensive line was terrible. Saints have a really, really good offensive line. After Adams...
You think the Saints have a really good offensive line?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and especially looking at their schedule with the easiest schedule, I think they're going to maul a lot of people. It's certainly going to be better than the Raiders last year when you're facing the Chargers front, the Chiefs front, even the Broncos front. So I think in that sense, it'll be better. And then also after Adams, there was nobody there.
Yeah, I guess
Waller was constantly injured. Renfro turned back into Hunter Renfro. So
the dome games is really nice. The dome, that's a big selling point for Olave. That actually Garrett Wilson doesn't have in his favor.
No, he doesn't. Yeah. I would lean Wilson still just because it's Aaron Rodgers. And I
Olave's
think
phenomenal.
Similar, but yeah.
Olave's phenomenal. So that is the example. That is the example of the receiver who is, has a below average starting quarterback on a team that I don't believe that this is an elite offensive line. They haven't invested in the offensive line. They lost Teron Armstead to Miami last year. They haven't had draft picks to invest anywhere on this team. The saving grace of that is the defense keeps getting older and worse. And in the secondary especially is letting opposing quarterbacks pass more and more on them. So that's a good thing. And Olave did have like 1,000-yard season last year. His yards per route run was top 10 in the league. The guy was super efficient, and he was an amazing college receiver. I love Chris Olave. I think he's phenomenal. And the fact that he was doing all this work downfield, it's the example that we're talking about where you're like, usually you just want to focus on receivers on good teams. Receivers you know are going to be in shootouts week to week. I don't know what the hell the Saints are. I really don't. Yeah. But this is the one receiver where I'm like, you know what? I ride with this guy.
Yeah, if you look in the betting markets, Derek Carr's pass yards props actually pretty high. And some of the research I did was looking at like where these elite receiver seasons come from. Obviously, people were like, some of them were like, yeah, no shit, Josh. You just look at the targets. But if you actually look at offensive environment, it kind of helps you realize like where we should be targeting our focus. And if you can be well above average in either pass attempts, pass yards, or touchdowns, that's really the environment where these receivers can step up. So like the Falcons, for instance, pretty concerning because I don't think Ritter is going to be above average in attempts, pass yards, or pass touchdowns. I think Derek Carr could very well be top 12 in the NFL in pass touchdowns and or passing yards. The attempts won't be there, but I actually think based on the schedule and how easy these teams are, I mean, Derek Carr could throw for like 26 touchdowns. And that's
what
11.
happened, man? Las Vegas has this guy. He puts up a 4,800-yard season, prolific season in 2021. Then he craters with a 3,500-yard season with the rest of the team, like you said, falling apart around him, and they just let him walk.
I think this is a secret tank job. If you look at Jimmy Garoppolo's deal, it's a 1-year deal. When you kind of look at where the money is, I think they're kind of like the third candidate in many ways for the number 1 pick next year. I know everyone's like, oh, it's gonna be the Cardinals, and if not the Cardinals, maybe the Buccaneers, because they weren't good last year. Now they have Baker, and then after that, like they start to look like. I mean, you could say like, what if the Colts and Richardson doesn't fire in year 1? But I really think the Raiders are like this sneaky number 1 pick contender where it's a bottom 3 pass defense, a bad offensive line. The skill players after like nearly 31-year-old Devontae Adams just aren't that exciting. Like Jacoby Myers is fun. He's fine, but you're not necessarily like, oh yeah, like we're winning a Super Bowl with this guy as a number 2. There's no Waller, who was kind of their biggest mismatch with Adams when healthy. You're kind of resting the offense on a running back who had nearly 400 touches last year and currently doesn't want to play. I wouldn't want to play either after getting 400 touches behind that Raiders offensive line last year.
Okay.
I think everything's
okay. You're smashing Chris Olave at the 2-3 turn. Everybody should smash Chris Olave at the 2-3 turn. There is no concerns. Whatever concerns I thought I had 5 minutes ago are now gone. Josh Larky has opened my eyes. Derek Carr, 4 straight seasons with a 68+% completion percentage and 4,000 yards. He had a bad year last year, okay, but he stacked up 4 good years before that. Guess who else has had bad seasons? Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers has straight up had inefficient, bad statistical seasons. It happens. It happens to every quarterback, and it happened to Derek Carr. Derek Carr is going to be fine. He is going to be good. This is the best team. Just looking at the Vegas over-under futures, this is the best team in the division. If there's going to be a team that's going to score points in a dome, it's going to be them. And Olave is the clear-cut number 1 option on this offense. So that is the direction you would go. If you had to, again, pick a player to draft from the NFC South, it would be Chris Olave, period. That's the guy. He's also just phenomenal, right? You have a top 10 most efficient wide receiver in the NFL who's getting a massive quarterback upgrade, right? I think the argument really is, why isn't Olave and Wilson, why aren't they, adjacent in the ADP? Why is Wilson going 8 picks earlier?
So I think they should probably go closer, but I do think that, I mean, who is the number 2 with New York? Allen Lazard. I like to think that at least week 1, Michael Thomas is more target competition. So right off the bat, I see more target competition there. Taysom Hill is probably the most annoying touchdown vulture ever to play the game. He's probably going to end up with 5 to 7 touchdowns, which won't go to Olave. So I think it does make sense why Wilson's situation's a touch better, since I know you're not interested in Michael Thomas, but the way I see it is I'm like, if I'm in a managed league, I am starting Michael Thomas week 1. How can you not? No Alvin Kamara. They're playing the Titans, who just allowed the most passing yards to opponents last year. Derek Carr, as you mentioned.
Oh, I didn't know they were playing the Titans week 1.
They're playing so with Michael Thomas, the way I see it is,
all right, that's a fine take.
I'm starting him week 1.
That's a fine take.
And if he stays healthy, I start him week 2, and I'll pretty much just start him until he gets injured. But week 1, Michael Thomas at 5,100 will be in my DFS lineups.
Oh my God. So most people are like, hey, player X is better in best ball. You're like, no, player Y, Michael Thomas, is better in managed leagues.
Yeah, I think you
don't want him in best ball. He's going to be retired by the time the fantasy playoffs come around, by the time the shootout hits. You don't want anything to do with him on underdog. You want him in a managed league.
Yeah, I start him week 1, and if it goes well, you just keep starting him. I mean, if you look at his pace, he's played 10 games in 3 years, but that pace over 17 games is actually 131 targets, 95 receptions, 1,035 receiving yards. Like, he's still there. He's just not going to play much. And in a managed league, what's nice, like you said, if he's done for the season, you drop him. Best ball, I wouldn't say I've totally faded him. I think I
would fade him
in a very large tournament. I'm like, what if he stays healthy?
Well,
but I've definitely been lower there.
But it's not in his range of outcomes to be better than Olave. It's not possible.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I think what we saw last year was, I think it was like a 20% target share through 3 games, which that's very good for a receiver. But I mean, Olave is better.
Yeah, Olave's he's going into his second year. I mean, oh my God. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's not like either one of them have rapport with Carr. They both have to build rapport with Carr. If I'm Carr, I'm probably going to be gravitating toward Olave, the guy I know that's going to be there for the long term as my, the guy I'm going to prioritize building rapport with. Just makes sense. All right, let's do a show. I think we should do I think I know how to bring you in. I think I've decided how to bring you in. This was pre-show. Did you realize it was pre-show?
Well, it's good. I told you I had my monologues prepared. We didn't do a monologue yet, so I've got. We'll save that for the show instead of.
You have a monologue prepared?
I have an Anthony Richardson monologue and like one from one other player later in the show. So
oh man,
people will enjoy it.
I'm glad you have my show sheet just so you can, so you can know when to time those monologues. Oh! Welcome to the Mind of Mansion program. The Wizard of the Underworld. That's right. He came from Player Profiler. He is now with the 33rd team, running his own analytics team over there. One of the best fantasy football analysts in the business. Here with me today, it is Josh Larky. Talk to me.
Matt, it's good. Feels great to be back on Mind of Mansion, and I have to say, I don't know if I'm getting old or you're getting old or both, but not everyone remembers that I was at Player Profiler, and I think it's because we're getting like this, which is good for the industry actually. When people don't know that I was at Player Profiler for 4.5 years, I'm like, hey, that's pretty good because for this industry to do well, we need new people to come in. So I think that's all else equal. That's got to be good for us. If more and more consumers are showing up and they're like, well, I thought you were at the 33rd team forever. And I was like, this wasn't really a team 2 years ago. I was actually a Player Profiler for 4.5 years. And I consider myself a Matt Kelly disciple. So it's
even
sometimes
the
nice
guys
for
that
people
founded
to realize
33rd
that.
team weren't at 33rd team forever. It's been around 2 years.
Yeah, it's a newer enterprise.
Yeah, it's going great. That was a great hire by them to hire Josh Larky.
Yeah, it definitely, I enjoyed it. So yeah, we won't talk about the middle company, but I've always been a big Player Profiler fan, continue to be. So yeah, I like to think that I was at Player Profiler and 33rd team, 2 of the better companies that you can work for in this space. So I've been really privileged in that sense.
We are a great company. We are. And I've heard great things about the 33rd team. We had Nick Bodiford on the show per your recommendation.
Yeah, rising star.
He was great. You're great. And we should talk about rookies to start because that's really what people want to, they want to talk about rookies. Just give me your top 5 rookies. Just give me your top 5 rookie running backs. Mm-hmm. Top 5.
So I think the first 2, if you don't have them this way, that's pretty bad. Bijan Robinson, number 1, Jahmyr Gibbs, number 2. I was
kind of hoping you'd start at 5 and work your way down, but okay, cool. Actually, you know what? That doesn't make sense. No, you're right. Actually, I'm so in this mode. No, you're right. Because I just dropped a thread on Twitter at @fantasy_mansion with my top 6. Actually, it was going to be 5 top 6 handcuffs just to be unique because everyone wants to be unique, right? So top 6 handcuffs, and there you want to start with the 6 and work your way down and create some suspense. But there's no suspense with Bijan and Gibbs, so you were right to actually get it out of the way because there's no suspense there. That was a great call by you.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Yeah, your audience, I think, is sophisticated enough that I don't need to discuss Bijan and Gibbs. We know who they are. If you don't, you should probably listen to more Player Profiler. I'm sure you've discussed them ad nauseum. Number 3.
Whoa, let's correct. No. Then in this case, I want to correct the question. I want to revise the question.
Oh.
Who is running back 3 through 7?
All right. This is what I had prepared because I think this is probably where it might get contentious. At number 3, I don't think it's a hot take, but maybe it is. I don't think Do you have Zach Charbonnet as your RB3?
No. What? Zach Charbonnet?
Yeah,
The guy who was drafted by the team that already has Kenneth Walker?
Yeah, so I generally like big, reasonably athletic running backs with pass catching. And only one of those two guys is fitting that bill, and that's Zach Charbonnet. Kenneth Walker, I think of Kenneth Walker as Saquon Barkley without the pass catching, where not every run looks pretty. Some kind of jerky, shifty style, looks like a freak athlete every time he touches the ball. Going to hit the wrong hole occasionally, but when he hits open space, he's gone. And you're just never going to catch that guy. And I've always said, like, the big value in a running back for running the ball is speed. Because at the end of the day, if a guy's not fast, he's not going to have those 60-yard runs. So I think Walker has that. Charbonnet doesn't. Pretty much everything else, Charbonnet kind of has. And I truly have no idea what the split's going to look like. I know the 33rd team zone, Ryan Reynolds, has said that he's hoping it's Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, which I think would actually be fun because then we all win.
But yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, Walker is very similar to Chubb in that way. Walker's like one of the best runners. He's not just a straight ahead slasher like a Tevin Coleman where you give him a hole, he's gone. He's also a tackle breaker, right? And
yeah, he's very, very good.
Yeah, this is why he was the best running back in college football, not Breece Hall the year they came out together. So this is why he won all the awards, right? He's that guy. He's that dude. He's also just an incredibly intense worker off the field, a great team player, a guy that the team is not going to give up on like the Detroit Lions gave up on DeAndre Swift. That's not going to happen with Kenneth Walker. I believe that they drafted Zach Charbonnet because they had a hole in the roster. They had no number 2 or number 3 running back. And they felt the pain of that when Walker was hurt the previous year. And that what we think of as precious draft capital, like in the second round, a lot of teams don't. They're just trying to fill out their roster. That's how some of these kickers and interior backers and whatnot get drafted in these valuable rounds where there's like, wow, you could have had an elite playmaker. You could have had a real athlete with upside at the edge position. What the hell are you doing? And they're like, well, no, we're filling out our roster. We have these clear needs. We have to fill them. I believe that's what they were doing with Zach Charbonnet. Technically does have less draft capital than Walker, a late second-round pick versus an early second-round pick. And then Walker also was good for fantasy when he was a starter, right? So he did produce. He wasn't a bust. So that's good.
Oh, yeah, Walker was great last year. I just think
he had a 1,000-yard season, for Christ's sake. And he had 27 catches, so he showed that he was a better catcher in the pros than he ever was in college. So these are some good indicators. No, they're not good indicators. I think that they are super encouraging indicators that Kenneth Walker is the primary back there for the foreseeable future as long as he's healthy. The thing with Zach Charbonnet, he has an opportunity to prove himself in camp without Kenneth Walker. This is the opportunity that every backup running back would hope for, to be able to run with the ones for the entirety of training camp.
Yeah, so I think maybe I can reframe this a little bit. I think Kenneth Walker was great. Do I think they should have taken Charbonnet? Absolutely not. I think if they took Kenny McIntosh in round 7 like they did, I would have been like, you know what? There it is. Like, that is their pass catcher. That is the right draft capital to put into the running back room, since we just spent a second-round pick on Walker. But I feel like with other situations, if you double tap the position, it usually means you weren't quite as happy as you should have been with the guy you took the year before. Like, generally, like at the running back position, don't we usually go, like, if they take like back-to-back guys in the third round, like the Niners, when it's like they've got, what was it, Trey Sermon and Tyrion Davis-Price. It's like, this was a mulligan because they didn't like the pick. They had a third rounder last year, now another third rounder this year.
But Tyrion Davis-Price wasn't necessarily any better. Tyrion Davis-Price wasn't a hit either. So that doesn't help Zach Charbonnet.
But that also, like, we weren't like, oh God, like, let's go Trey Sermon. That's what we want to see. Whereas, like, right now we're kind of like, let's go Kenneth Walker. And I don't think Walker's going to be a bust. I think he can have a similar season to last year potentially, but I do think it's got to be at least some indictment on him. I mean, you didn't see a lot of other teams with running backs from last year or 2 years ago, like the Steelers with Najee Harris, undrafted rookie Jalen Warren last year, and they didn't really grab somebody this year. If they were to take someone in the second round this year, we'd have been like, wow, do they like Najee Harris? I'm not quite sure. And I kind of think the Seahawks view Kenneth Walker as this base down grinder back who's going to get 15 carries a game. And that's going to be pretty good for real football. I don't quite know if that moves the needle for fantasy. He might get more work than that, but I think that's kind of the concern is like, here's 15 Walker carries, Charbonnet, here's 7 carries and 4 targets.
I like Walker generally because I know that he can play, right? I know that he's going to have a role, and he caught more passes than I expected last year, right? I haven't seen Charbonnet on an NFL field. Charbonnet strikes me as soft. Charbonnet strikes me as someone, and because I've seen this movie before, there's been a lot of these guys, especially seniors, that why they didn't come out as juniors, I don't know. Like we have to get in the heads of these players and hear what they were hearing from their agents, what was being whispered to them. Why didn't he come out? If he was so good the year prior, why didn't he come out? A lot of these guys that put up their best season as seniors, they're the most likely to fail because they are older and bigger and stronger and more experienced than the guys that they're playing against at the college level when they put up these big seasons, right? So you're putting a lot of weight on this 37 catches. Without the 37 catches, right, Zach Charbonnet becomes just another senior that had good but not great production in college. The catches were really like a wow factor for him. Like this guy caught 37 passes in 10 games. That's an 11% target share. That's incredible, right? The
third on the team in receptions.
It's crazy, right? It's crazy. He was third on the team in receptions, exactly. But when these guys get to the NFL, what becomes of them when they actually, and then sure enough, boom, this guy, he's missing time with a shoulder injury. So some of my suspicions about him that he transferred when he didn't have to transfer, right? They didn't come out early. These are just, it's a program running in the back of my head going, man, why doesn't this guy carry himself throughout the process of getting to the NFL like a true stud? Because if I look at that last season, 10 games, 1,400 yards rushing, 37 catches, this is superstar stuff. But he didn't turn heads during the process at all. He didn't go to the Senior Bowl, right? He basically got drafted where a guy like that, that's his floor to go late second round. Like, why didn't he get drafted earlier? I don't know. I don't know what the hell's going on with him, but I just have sort of unmeasurable concerns that he's just not going to translate to what the demands are for NFL running backs. And I wish I could give you more because 3 years ago.
So would you have preferred if he... Is that kind of the issue, or is it's purely that he stayed that 4th year?
The staying of the 4th year was bad. The transfer was bad. The agility score is horrible, right? So now he's got sort of a DeMarco Murray, straight line-ish, Tevin Coleman play style that you have to deal with too. And these guys, they dealt with a lot of lower body and upper body injuries, right? DeMarco Murray was dealing with a lot of rib injuries, so was Tevin Coleman, shoulder injuries, hamstring injuries, and now already Charbonnet's got a shoulder injury, right? So you've got this tall, upright runner that lacks lateral quickness and was getting a lot of dump-off passes in his senior year. That's now what it boils down to. And when I look at the headshot comparison between Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker on Player Profiler, I can't help but be terrified for Zach Charbonnet that he has to go up against this guy. It's the same reason why I'm terrified on behalf of Jameson Williams. You don't want to have to be in the shadow of Amon-Ra St. Brown, his scowl every single day, looking at him, outworking you, challenging you, demoralizing you every single day. And I think that's going to happen to Zach Charbonnet with Kenneth Walker. Same exact thing, where it's just going to be an alpha-beta relationship, and the beta often doesn't sustain his career because his soul has been taken from him by the alpha. That's what I'm worried about. Now, again, none of this is metrics based. None of this is even statistical. This is just through years of heuristic analysis of seeing backfields and seeing players come out in certain situations that now I have an instinct for when players are in trouble, when they're entering the league versus when they're set up for success. So on the other end of the spectrum, Roschon Johnson is set up for success. Everything about him from college screams this is a stud who was a senior for all the right reasons, because he was a team captain and he was playing behind Bijan Robinson and he didn't transfer like Keontae Ingram did, right? So now, and then when he goes to the Senior Bowl and actually goes to the Senior Bowl and he actually shows out at the Senior Bowl and he plays with a broken hand at the Senior Bowl, and he's one of the most efficient runners, and he was a more efficient receiver in limited sample in his final year, I'm predisposed to be like, okay, this guy is coming from a place where he's ready on day one to be an NFL sort of veteran presence. He's not going to go through this rookie year where he's going to be injured, he's going to be fumbling, he's going to be in and out of the coach's graces, right? It's going to be one of those things. I guarantee Charbonnet is going to have a fumble problem. He's going to have an injury problem. All these things. This is most rookies. They get thrust in these situations, have these problems. The one guy that I'm pretty confident is going to be Roschon.
So a lot to unpack. Before we leave Charbonnet at RB3, I will say that he and Kenneth Walker were both college freshmen in 2019. One of these guys had 157 touches and 11 touchdowns, and the other was Kenneth Walker, who had 4 touchdowns on 100 touches. So
for Wake Forest, he was at Wake Forest and he couldn't command any touches.
That's Walker. Yeah, he was at Wake Forest.
I know. Zach Charbonnet actually had an impressive freshman season.
Yeah,
I know. What happened to him in the meantime? I don't know. COVID happened.
Yeah.
He had his sister was in California, and she actually had a health concern, and he wanted to get close to her. There's a lot of narrative-based reasons where you can explain, Zach Evans wanted to be closer to his coach. He had a great relationship with him. It wasn't that Kendre Miller stole his soul. I just see soul stealing. I see soul stealing among teammates where I didn't before. And the upside of seeing it through that lens is, well, it's not like Jameson Williams can ever be much anyway, because he's never going to be the number 2. I mean, he's never going to be the number 1. So he's always going to be the number 2, right? And what is the upside of a guy that has a number 2 receiver on his own team ceiling? Not that great. Same with Charbonnet. I don't see it. And so therefore, I have no reason to post him up at 3, because I know he can't usurp Kenneth Walker. I don't see it. I just don't see it. So then what are we talking about? We're talking about, like you said, Kareem Hunt level ceiling. That guy, if you want to put that guy outside your top 5, or you want to totally fade a Jameson Williams, it's a safe move, man. It's a safe move because they can't hurt you. They can't hurt you. The only way it hurts you is if Kenneth Walker is injured, right? Or Amon-Ra St. Brown is injured. And no one wants that, man. No one wants that, because I think I think you want more than maybe a couple of years ago when you were a little more just the numbers. You appreciate that there are these certain players that have this dog element to their whole attitude and persona, whether it be Amon-Ra, whether it be Kenneth Walker, where you end up rooting for those guys.
So if we turn to Jameson Williams, so he can't produce because Amon-Ra's there. He's number one.
No. I'm saying that if you fade him, that
Mm-hmm.
he can't hurt you the way a player like Chris Olave, who could become the number one receiver for his
Well,
team and just absolutely crushes you. Or like a better example even was Garrett Wilson. When he was drafted by the Jets, there was no target competition in front of him at all. And so if he hits as a number one, that could really hurt you long term as a dynasty gamer and a dynasty analyst. That could really come back and burn you, right?
so we have seen the emergence of this number two receiver, and I think a good one is the reason I like Jameson Williams. I have gotten lower on him.
Wait,
this
you like
past year.
Jameson Williams?
So with
You what? You don't
I
like Jameson Williams? Stop it.
so
You like him?
so what I like about Jameson Williams is that, I mean, what's stopping him from being 2022 Jalen Waddle year after year once he's adjusted to the NFL? The reason I
How
say
long
that,
does he have to adjust to the NFL? He's in his second year already. And he's punching
it,
teammates. He's leaving practice
yeah,
early. He doesn't want to be a football player. How many times do we have to see this? How many you can't ignore these signals. My new mantra is when the player tells you that
mhm.
they don't want to be a football player, listen.
So I have been dropping him with all the drama. I do not like it, but I still think the Tyreek Hill Jalen Waddle example is relevant in the sense that over and over again, year after year, we see pairs of wide receiver teammates be awesome. Many years of Evans and Godwin, many years of Lockett and Metcalf, AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. Like it, every single year we see it. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. We always see these pairs of teammates being awesome. 2 years ago, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, both wide receiver one types. It happens year after year after year.
Was
What
was
we
wait, wait,
need
wait,
from
wait,
this
wait,
number
wait,
two.
wait. Was Mike Williams a wide receiver one?
I said that I think he was wide receiver 13 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's the ceiling for Jameson Williams. I don't think he can be a wide receiver one because
Well,
he's on a team that
he's
has a
fast
Keenan
though.
Allen style target hog. Where if you have a Cooper Kupp on that team, if you have an Amon-Ra St.
Mhm.
Brown, we're talking Amon-Ra St. Brown is a 170 target hog. That's
Yeah,
the
that's what
difference.
we saw from Tyreek Hill last year. And then Jalen Waddle on just over 100 targets, running deep downfield as a speedster that can win. Jalen Waddle had almost 1,400 yards. He was nearly a wide receiver one in fantasy. Obviously, that's not quite the ceiling of like the Amon-Ra or that
Right,
the
he was
Tyreek
wide
Hill on
receiver
that team.
12 in fantasy points per game. He was very good. Yes, that would be the absolute ceiling
Mhm.
outcome for Jameson Williams. But already that's not possible because Jalen Waddle didn't come into the NFL hurt, and he didn't have all of this friction with his teammates and with the coaching staff in his second year. The guy was a stud from the beginning. The guy was great from the
Mhm.
beginning. In week one of 2021, he put up 16 fantasy points.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen for JMO early this year. I think if you're drafting him, you stash him on the bench in a deeper redraft league, and a few weeks into his return, you're probably starting him because the Lions are going to score a lot of points. Fifth highest scoring offense last year. We all know what happened with Jamal Williams and the touchdowns. That's probably not going to happen again on that offense. So there's more passing touchdowns then. This is kind of the environment we want, a team that plays in a dome. Jared
They
Goff
played in a dome
supported
last year,
Brandon.
right? They played in a dome last year.
They did. Jameson Williams was
They were up
hurt
tempo last year,
though. Yeah.
where he had one
We saw
catch. He
some.
had one catch in 6 games.
Oh, I agree. The rookie season was terrible. But
One catch.
if they were to have gone out and taken a wide receiver in round 2 of the draft, I would have been very nervous. They didn't really do anything. They brought in 33-year-old Marvin Jones. They have Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond. They drafted Sam Laporta, who plays tight end. They did nothing to make me think they don't believe in Jameson Williams. They simply said Marvin Jones is going to break after a month and a half. Perfect. Put him in there for the first 6 weeks. Jameson Williams takes that role. I have lowered expectations for JMO compared to where I was earlier this offseason, given the suspension, the immaturity at practice. But this is what we talked about earlier, where if we like an offense, it's really hard sometimes to pick and choose who's going to be good and who's going to be bad.
It's not hard
And
in
I feel
this
like
case.
the Lions.
No, my larger point is,
Mhm.
yes, you want to focus on offenses that generate fantasy points. That should be a priority when you're drafting players. And then when you're drafting players early, you want to focus on players that you know are as risk-free as possible, right? That's the case. My case for drafting Amon-Ra St. Brown at the 103. The answer isn't, oh, I can't get Amon-Ra because I had the 103 and I picked Cooper Kupp or I picked Eckler or I picked McCaffrey, whatever, right? Not Kupp anymore because he's hurt and he's slipping into the late first. But okay, I took McCaffrey. I'm not going to get Amon-Ra. Oh well. I do want exposure to the Lions, and I can't just be bullish on one player. Like I like Gibbs. You talk yourself into bad players on great teams. That's the danger, right? That's the danger. You can't just, like you said, you can't just all out dismiss an entire division of teams and players. Like I maybe could almost get there with the NFC South if not for Chris Olave and Chris Godwin, right? But with teams like the Lions, my response is just move up Amon-Ra to the 103. Just if you love this offense so much and he's clearly that guy in every way, and he's going to be this year's Cooper Kupp, like 25 fantasy points a game, he's going to hog all the targets, he's going to blot out the sun, he's going to actually make it difficult or impossible for Jameson Williams to get 100-plus targets because so much is going to be siphoned to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Just draft him at the 103 and get it over with. That's the move if you're bullish on the Lions.
I mean, if his ADP was 103, I would have some exposure. That feels a little early for me. But if he went there, I wouldn't want to have no exposure, since I think Amon-Ra he's kind of like my dark horse pick to lead the NFL in receptions.
Dark horse. That's the thing, man. That's the thing. We need to get the word out, and that's why we're talking on August 9th. Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to enter that top tier of NFL receivers. There's currently a big 2, and it's going to be a big 3 when this year's over. This is how it works, right?
Yeah.
Cooper Kupp put up 27 fantasy points a game, not because he was the most explosive, not because he was the toughest, right? Not because he could jump the highest, but because he wanted it the most. Wide receiver is a crazy position in that it feels like a position, it looks like a position that is almost 100% athleticism based. But then when you dig into the numbers, like with the Breakout Finder app, you realize, oh, wait, athleticism actually isn't that big of a driver of performance after all. And just because Jameson Williams can run fast, that's only one element of it. And maybe there's a reason why he had to transfer. And maybe there's a reason why he only had that one big season, right? It was manufactured at Alabama, where he couldn't crack the field against players that are actual like superstars or soon to be superstars like Jackson Smith and Jigba in the NFL, right? So when you think about it, it's a lot about the mental acuity of the player. When you hear Cooper Kupp interviewed and he talks about how he knew they weren't running a fire zone, but then he also realized in the moment that it wasn't a replacement fire zone, right? And he just had to beat his guy to the end zone and the ball was right there. It doesn't matter that Amon-Ra St. Brown can't run a 4.4. It's not going to matter. He's going to be open every single time, and he's going to be exactly where Goff wants him to be every single time. And when you do that game after game after game, and you treat your body like a temple the way he does, and you don't suffer these hamstring injuries and all these injuries that Jameson Williams is definitely going to suffer because he doesn't really want to be there, right? He's going to go up and put up 170 targets. And he's going to be the wide receiver 3, if not the wide receiver 1 or 2.
I love Amon-Ra. Yeah, I just think,
but he's still going at the 109, 1010. There's no 1010.
The 110, but right now
he's still
we're
going
trying
there.
to
And
make
to
it.
me, that's offensive. To me, it's
You're
like
pitting-
as soon as Cooper Kupp got hurt, you had to immediately start drafting Amon-Ra before Cooper Kupp. Immediately.
I'm not quite there yet. Maybe I'll get there later on. Cooper Kupp's still
You're too
fantasy
busy
points per
drafting
game
Jameson
leader at
Williams
receiver.
to get your Lions exposure, Josh. That's what I'm saying. It makes
I've
it
been
easier.
taking a ton of Amon-Ra.
It makes it easier to go to the absolute wall, to go to war for Amon-Ra, if you also recognize Jameson Williams is never going to be anything. Because you also know the probability that any given first-round wide receiver hits is a coin flip anyway. So if the bunch of these guys are going to bust, you need to be smart about how you pick which guy's going to bust. Wilson and Olave have already hit. So now these other guys, London, Burks, Williams, there's more likely than not, they are going to bust.
All right. So before we leave Jameson Williams, you keep bringing up Cooper Kupp and Amon-Ra as kind of a good parallel. I agree. I think Amon-Ra could be like Cooper Kupp. I do remember 2 years ago, Cooper Kupp he sets the record for fantasy points by a receiver. Robert Woods was getting 15 fantasy points a game prior to getting injured. There is room for someone to have literally the best receiver season of all time, Cooper Kupp, and another player on that offense, Robert Woods, who is definitely not as good when it comes to like fantasy points per target. When he's running close to the line of scrimmage, he does not run a 4.38 type 40 like JMO. So I think there's a path. And Jameson Williams happens to go in like round like 11, 12, 13 right now. So I think I'm allowed to draft Amon-Ra in round 1. And then also like drafting the other guy that's probably number 2 in an offense we love in like round 13 or 11, whatever it might be.
In week 1, the number 2 is going to be Marvin Jones. I'm telling you that right now. Okay.
I agree. Yeah.
So there's going to be Marvin Jones. I don't know when Jameson Williams is ever going to take his head out of his ass. I don't care. I'm not here for it. I don't care. Like, it's over. Like, he's already over. He had one catch. And so now you have to show me after your one catch season that you want to be out there. You have to show some positive signs. And all there's been is negative signs. So it's now negative on top of negative. It's bad on top of bad. So yes, Robert Woods was a phenomenal receiver. He actually was one of the more underrated wide receiver prospects of all time. He's top 20 all time on the Breakout Finder because he was an incredible age-adjusted producer at USC. That's Robert Woods. Like Robert Woods is a great receiver in a vacuum. Marvin Jones has been a very good professional receiver during his career. There's other players on this roster that could step up and command targets. It could be a non-receiver. It could be a combination of Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta that fills that target vacuum because someone has to get the other targets from Jared Goff after Amon-Ra gets his 170. It doesn't necessarily need to be the guy that was drafted early recently, because we know that a lot of these guys bust. There's just been so many opportunities that we've had to identify these busts early. And so often, even going back to, let's say, N'Keal Harry, right? N'Keal Harry was obvious after year 1, right? As soon as you get usurped by an undrafted free agent on the depth chart, right? By Jacoby Myers, who's also a rookie, it's over. Like, but no, me, you, most people, we were holding on to our evaluation of him from college and the first round draft capital for at least another year, drafting him in seasonal leagues, maybe even trading for him in Dynasty. And I'm done, Josh. I'm just letting you know, in the last 6 months since we last talked, I'm done. I'm done with all of this. I'm pushing these guys out onto a raft and I'm sailing away.
Well, we'll end this one on an agreement. I wouldn't say Drake London is like an absolute bust, for his career, most likely. Rookie season was pretty good. I will agree with you. I can't draft Drake London this year. We talked about bad offenses. Drake London, poster child for the bad passing offense. I think what people don't realize is everyone's like, oh my God, like, did you see Drake London at the end of the season with Desmond Ridder, who's going to be his quarterback? Drake London was awesome. But there was no Kyle Pitts and there was no Bijan Robinson. Drake London, when he played with Kyle Pitts in 10 games, averaged 37 yards a game. The 7 games he didn't play with Pitts, he averaged not 37, but 70 yards a game. When a team in free agency is signing extremely expensive interior offensive linemen and drafting a running back at pick 8 and having Desmond Ridder at quarterback, that to me says we are once again going to have low pass volume. And I talked before about how you kind of want your passing offense to be above average somewhere. It's got to have like at least one good thing. Well, there have been 4 wide receiver 1 types over the past decade to play on offenses below average everywhere. And they generally didn't look like Drake London because they were either extremely fast or 2014 Mike Evans was like the one weird guy where the Bucs were terrible that year and he had 12 receiving touchdowns and nobody else on the team had more than 2. So like for some reason, like he caught like literally
that's the outlier of it. What?
So if you think Drake London, London's going to catch 12 touchdowns and Pitts has 1 and Bijan has 1, sure. But if those 4 receivers that were on offenses that were below average in pass attempts, pass yards, pass touchdowns, someone might be like, well, how do we get the Falcons above that? And I'm like, well, so I did the math. There were 156 pass attempts below league average, 993 pass yards below league average, and 40% below league average for pass touchdowns. Do I think Drake London has top 12 upside? No. Therefore, why would I draft him in round 4 if he needs to have top 12 upside for me to be pretty happy with that pick? I will simply just not draft the guy catching passes from Desmond Ridder with Bijan Robinson at running back.
Thank you. See, this is where I knew as soon as I saw some of your fades and some of your bullish calls, I was like, I know where we're in the center of the Venn diagram, and I know when we're going to disagree. We're going to disagree when it comes to bad players on good offenses, because I know you're chasing that dragon, and you're going to be right in some of these cases. I've been wrong plenty, right? And you're going to be right about some of these guys, right? And you're going to hit on a guy that's in a great offense, and it's going to be a big hit, and I'm going to just have to congratulate you, right? But where we are going to agree is on the bad offenses. There are good players on bad offenses, and they're just doomed, right? And Drake London has one of my favorite advanced metrics dichotomies in that his target rate was 32.4, which was number 2 in the NFL. He was number 2 in the NFL in targets per route run. He was heavily targeted. He was the guy, he was the focal point of that passing game. Okay? Do you know that he finished number 57 in the NFL in routes run? So that metric loses its fucking meaning when you're outside the top 50 in routes run. That's how a guy that's commanding targets at a high rate, given the context of his offense and is relatively efficient, can be Josh Palmer.
I would agree. Yeah. That's why I like guys like Quentin Johnston. That's why I refuse to be out on Zach Charbonnet. If we really like the offense, like you said, that's where the big hits come from. I'm willing to miss.
Like, here's the thing. I'm fading Charbonnet. I'm fading Quentin Johnston. I'm fading Jameson Williams. This has been a constant sort of talking point that I've had, a hobby horse for the last few weeks. Yeah. I will rate them accordingly. I'm a dead certain lock that Jameson Williams is a bust, and you should not draft him. The opportunity cost, no matter where he goes, is a wasted pick. Okay? Do not draft him. He can't play. Okay? Quentin Johnston is interesting if he falls, and I'm scared that he could have a big season and embarrass me. I have no fear about Jameson Williams doing that. I do have some fear about Quentin Johnston. Zach Charbonnet is on the right team Now in the right situation as the primary back throughout training camp, and he does have the thing that I covet the most in a rookie running back, which is size plus receiving skills. 220 pounds, catching 37 passes in his final year. Those things really influence me. Okay? So now I'm at a point where I have to draft Charbonnet, right? I don't like him. I'm worried about him. I prefer Walker in Dynasty for sure, because I think as the next few years play out, it's not a situation where Charbonnet can really hurt you significantly over the next few years, but there is a window of 4 games, 5 games at the beginning of the season, if for whatever reason Kenneth Walker has a setback with his groin injury or he's just not ready to start the season, where Charbonnet it outperforms his ADP and he really does burn me. It's very possible, especially from a big back that can catch passes. It's a dangerous game I'm playing with Charbonnet. I feel confident that there's enough red flags on Quentin Johnston's profile that it's just not going to happen for him. And I'm certain that Jameson Williams is a bust. That's the full range of players I'm fading from confidence level
in terms of,
on one end to the other. I'm not pounding the table to not draft Zach Charbonnet. Someone drafts Zach Charbonnet, especially in seasonal leagues, given the where we are right now, how much we know about Kenneth Walker's injury, and the Seattle offense. The Seattle offense is going to be a bonanza. Think about who they play. They play the Cardinals twice. They play the Rams twice. The Rams are going to have one of the worst secondaries in the league this year.
So I looked at have you looked at the actual starting depth chart? If I remember correctly,
tell me.
Their starters on defense, I believe half of them are undrafted, if not undrafted rookies. I think it was half the starting defense is undrafted rookies. I've never seen anything like this before. This is probably going to be the worst secondary that we've seen in the past decade. Like, whatever you thought about the Vikings last year, because their lack of pass rush and how they just let people throw 5 to 10 yard passes on them at will, it's going to be like that for the Rams, except you can you can kind of attack them wherever. It won't just be like, oh, the short to intermediate part of the field's open. You're going to be able to hit them deep. They've been cleaned out. So it's Aaron Donald and a bag of bones. And it wouldn't surprise me if he requests to be traded. How fun would it be if Aaron Donald was on the Chargers, where literally the only hole they have on defense is interior defensive line. You just slap Aaron Donald there and say, hey, you don't want to play with 5 or 6 undrafted rookies this year. And we don't blame you. Here, you don't even have to move houses. You can stay in Los Angeles, have fun. Chargers need some help on run defense. Obviously, you sacking the quarterback's not going to hurt. So those games against the Rams, oh boy.
I was on the Deep End last night. So it's on YouTube. The Deep End is also, I'll put a link to the podcast to subscribe to the Deep End podcast with Mike Shope and Adam Krautwurst. I was on last night with them. They're high stakes players. They're total sharks, these guys. And it was on the podcast, and we were talking about Jonathan Taylor. And I don't know if you've heard, but Jonathan Taylor is currently in a contract dispute with the Colts. Have you heard about this?
I have. I saw the video. He's limping. His back hurts. He's never going to play football again. I've seen it all. Yeah.
It's so fraudulent. It's because if he holds out, he's going to have to play $37,000 a day. He doesn't want to pay $37,000 a day, whatever the amount is. So in order to, it's just like J.K. Dobbins. I've got so many injuries. Yes, he's got a walker. It's terrible. It's awful.
Yeah.
It's
poor
really
24-year-old. Yeah,
I know it's terrible, but it's when you sign a really bad deal like this collective bargaining agreement, it creates these absurdities. When the bargaining agreement itself is absurd, then you create these absurd behaviors in the players that you're treating unfairly, which is what's happening. So we game planned what could happen to Jonathan Taylor. Where would you like to see him traded, for example? Right? We played it out. And my favorite trade destination, because it would just be incredible for real football, is Jonathan Taylor to the Chargers.
That'd be... Whoa.
Jonathan Taylor to the Chargers. Fantasy gamers, this is where fantasy gamers and real football fans diverge the most, where if I say that to a fantasy gamer, they're like repulsed. They're like, ew, no, that would kill all my Eckler. Oh, no, Jonathan Taylor would lose all his passing game touches. Oh, that would be the worst. And if you talk to a Chargers fan who doesn't play fantasy football and say, hey, what if you guys have like all this cap space, right? They're like middle of the pack in cap space. They have over $10 million of cap space. They can afford it. What if you acquire Jonathan Taylor to complement Austin Eckler, because you know he's a satellite back and he's enduring more punishment than even he wants to endure? They would be like, that was an amazing idea.
Yeah, I've thought of 2 landing spots. The Chargers, and then this one's funnier. You know who could really use a running back like Taylor? The Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, if Pacheco can be that good in that offense, Taylor's the same speed, and he's also actually just a really, really good pure running back. Oh boy. I would love to see Jonathan Taylor and Clyde Edwards-Helaire on the same depth chart. I mean, who wouldn't?
Well, you know why that can't happen, right?
Why can't that happen?
Chiefs have no cap space at all.
Oh really? I haven't looked at their cap situation. I knew it was space. I didn't know exactly where it was at. I knew it was low because they were out of the running really early.
It's like they have like $1. It's literally like $1.50.
All right.
They have nothing.
No Jonathan Taylor.
The Chargers though. You know who had, and the other one, there's 2 no-brainers from a real football standpoint that fantasy gamers would absolutely despise. And again, I laid it out in great detail on the deep end. You get this is a great podcast. Check it out. It's the link is in the description. You can't believe this. The Cowboys. I mean, the Cowboys with Jonathan Taylor. Right? Again, yeah. It would be terrible for me and all my Pollard, but I don't care. I'd love to see the Cowboys with Jonathan Taylor. I think it would be a special thing.
That would be a fun one. I wouldn't say I'm fading Pollard, but I think I'm just kind of at the field. I haven't understood the hype. And people are like, well, he was really good in fantasy last year. He's getting way more touches this year.
And he was really efficient last year.
Tony Pollard is built like a wide receiver. He's not super heavy. He's pretty tall. And he's never gotten touches before. I looked from age 1 through current age of Tony Pollard. His 193 carries last year were the most in his career by far. He never played running back growing up. He didn't have the body for it.
He wasn't a running back in college. He didn't even really
fully play running back in college. And then he comes to the NFL, and the NFL goes, you know what? We love you in this change of pace role. I think he can probably get more than 193 carries, but I'm not quite sure what the ceiling is for carries. Maybe 225. I think he can grow a little bit there. And then people are also like, well, Tony Pollard is this sublime receiver. And I'm like, look at his 10.5% target share, like number 19 in the NFL among running backs. Like, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's the guy you think is like this truly ridiculous receiver. And maybe he is, but
he's a very good receiver. He's a very good receiver. There's a reason he's not going in the first round.
Like that.
I think it's all the reason you're saying that you like him at cost just fine is because he's priced fairly. He's priced fairly.
I think he should be
in another universe. He would be a first round pick. He looks in many ways like a first round pick, given the depth chart and his skill set and what we've seen from Eckler and what we've seen from McCaffrey with these satellite back plus skill sets where they get all the touches and they get the touchdowns. They become first round running backs. These doubts are baked in to that ADP at the 2-3 turn.
Yeah, I take him a good amount there. some people are starting to be very excited. They're like, that's my RB3 and my RB4. And I'm like, guys, it's hard for me to rank someone ahead of players that are going to be getting like 5 to 6 more carries and like 1 to 3 more targets per game. Apologies. I don't think Pollard's like truly that good at football that he can outpace that efficiency to that extreme degree. Great player, but
Josh, we have someone.
Say my 5.
We have someone who's new to the show. We have Daryl Benson. Daryl Benson on Facebook.
5 running backs.
Daryl Benson on Facebook's new to the show. He doesn't realize that we just go off in every direction and we don't necessarily give a shit whether we actually circle back and get to running back number 4. Oh, we forgot. We got to go back. We're having a good conversation, Daryl. We're connecting from one player to the next in a nice seamless transition from Jonathan Taylor to Tony Pollard. This is called a conversation, Daryl. This is how it works. And when you don't feel me stopping the conversation or winding back the conversation or calling back to something awkwardly that we need to finish in order to get to the next part of the show sheet, that's called good radio. It's called a great listening experience. And you in the chat are ruining it. You're ruining it by insisting that Josh have to go back into his papers and turn back all the way to his rookies and finish the list of his rookie 3 through 7 because it's just bugging you that we've moved on. And we've moved on a long time ago. We moved on to receivers after we talked about one running back. One rookie running back, Zach Charbonnet, leads right into Jameson Williams, leads right into Quentin Johnston, and that's how these shows tend to go, Daryl. So with that, Josh, we do need your running back 4.
Oh, I was going to say it's okay. Daryl just friend requested me on Facebook, so I was going to give him my rankings that way. So anyway, that was a joke. Running back 4. I had
Daryl, please. If you follow us on Facebook, don't unfollow us. We're trying to get new Facebook followers. So please, Daryl, please forgive me. You know, in all sincerity, I appreciate you as a listener. Mm-hmm. Just whatever. Do not unfollow us on Facebook. Our Facebook followers are gold.
So I don't think
everyone go follow us on Facebook. Because... Roto Underworld on Facebook. Everyone should go follow us on Facebook. Be or friends. So is it friends or follow?
Isn't it like on Facebook?
Like us. Like, follow, and friend us on Facebook. Please.
So before we turn back to everything else, my 4 through 7s are boring. I have Roschon, Johnson, Kendre Miller, Tank Bigsby, Devon Achane in the same tier. I think anyone that is convinced they know exactly how this is going to go is lying to you.
No, but that's really good, though, that you have Miller kind of and like Roschon right there. You have them right there. And after this conversation, knowing that there really isn't an RB1 outcome for Zach Charbonnet unless Kenneth Walker gets hurt, I think you know the right thing to do is to move Roschon and Kendre Miller ahead.
I mean, that's our second-round draft capital. Pretty tough.
In general, in Dynasty, I just draft the profile and I let it play out from there. The fact that a guy has to compete with another guy in the depth chart, oh well. If you love that player in Dynasty, you have them for their career, a lot can happen. Guys can get traded. Guys can hold out. Guys can get hurt. There's significant reasons to ignore the dynamics around the team that may drive down your perception of a player in Dynasty where, you know, in a seasonal league context, it's a huge factor, right? But, you know, Drake London could be looking at a much different situation next year, right? If they upgrade the quarterback position and they have a change in philosophy, that can happen in a 1 or 2 year span. Suddenly Drake London is looking really good in Atlanta. But as of right now, given the situation, he's a Dynasty player only. I would only want him in Dynasty.
I was debating this with Ian Miller, our lead Dynasty analyst. He and I had a pretty big debate about this. And I was kind of saying that ultimately I'm selling Drake London right now. and I'm going to buy him back like halfway through the season. I just don't want to have to deal with not starting him the first couple months. And then a couple months into the season, I know what my roster looks like. I know who I'm actually willing to move, where the strength of my team is for that season.
I'm
And
actively
like,
trying to
all right,
move him
let's get him
now,
back.
and I'm not even trying to get him back, to be honest. I mean, I'm trying to move him now. What I'm saying is I would never touch him in seasonal leagues, given his ADP is like player 50 off the board. I think that's like 2 rounds too early.
It's often sooner than that. Yeah, I see him go in the 40s all the time.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But in the FFPC, he goes at pick 50 because of his tight end premium. So
yeah,
bottom line is, he goes 4th round. It's wild. It doesn't make any sense. He is the quintessential 6th round pick, and before that doesn't make any sense. So I would run and hide from him in seasonal leagues. He's certainly an acceptable asset to hold on to in Dynasty. I'm not saying, he's a big Dynasty fade or anything, but me personally, because I'm always playing to win every year, and there is always the option to buy a guy back if you see that things are trending in a different direction than you assumed when you did the trade. That's fine. That's fine. But offload him now. I think that now is the time to offload him, because there could be news that breaks in the next couple weeks where you start to see, his rapport isn't what we thought it was. We're already seeing Mac Hollins outperforming him in camp. Like, that's not going to get me off of a guy in Dynasty that Mac Hollins is flashing in camp. But enough of these things happen that it can affect even the guy's Dynasty ADP. If there's enough news, certainly he could get injured. That's a fear, right? If you're not going to benefit from what he does in September and October, why are you risking having him on your roster in Dynasty at all right now?
Yeah, I think too often Dynasty people go, all right, well, it's a good young player. I know his Dynasty value will go up at some point. And I agree, like, his value will probably go up at some point. He had a pretty good rookie year by peripherals. We just hate the offense. But that's not going to really happen this year. And
it might never happen. That's the other thing to remind people. It might never happen.
I actually think it might not happen next year either, because I think the Falcons are going to win like 8 games. And then they're going to be like, well, I don't know, like Jimmy Garoppolo could be there next year. I don't Ryan Tannehill. Not that these are bad quarterbacks compared to Desmond Ridder, but it's the idea that it feels like they're still multiple steps away from actually getting the guy that's going to sling it.
Are they going to walk away from the Bijan-centric offense next year after they just drafted the guy in the top 10 the year prior?
This is a team that wants to run the ball, and it's very at odds with 2 top 8 picks at tight end and receiver in prior years. And I also think this is the perfect case study for why quarterback matters. Do you think the Falcons are a top 10 offense?
No. And
that's very interesting, because they've spent 3 straight top 8 picks on skill players. And I agree, they're not a top 10 offense. It's
because the way to be a top 10 offense is through the quarterback and the offensive line, not the skill players. They're doing it they're building the team from the outside in, when the best way to build a winning roster, according to myself and Anand Nduri, we talk about this every week on the Decision Point show on this network, is you build a team from the inside out. And then ultimately all the skill position players benefit. Amon-Ra benefits because the Lions drafted Penei Sewell. You do realize that, right? That's, people have to realize that. It's crazy. And the thing with Drake London I realized is players can have outlier advanced metric seasons. There is a path to not only having a lucky season with counting stats and fantasy points, but in that same season, your advanced metrics can also be great. And those could be unsustainable, right?
Well, Drake London with Kyle Pitts have, 20% target share, 37 yards a game. That's not that exciting. The reason that his full season target share is in the high 20s is because the final month of the season, Desmond Ridder literally had nobody to throw to other than Drake London.
Well, Olamide
so the advanced metrics.
Why do you think his target rate was so high? Because the other option was Olamide Zaccheaus.
You could put pretty bad receivers in that situation, and they'd have a 25%. I mean, we saw that last year with Darnell Mooney had a 25% target share with the Bears. Like, none of us are out there, like, no one's being like, oh, like Darnell Mooney and Drake London are equally good. And it's like, well, actually, by target share, these guys were pretty similar. And
If
if you
liked a
hate
guy
Darnell
in
Mooney,
college and then he gets drafted in the top 10, the worst case scenario for you in Dynasty is that he actually puts up great peripheral metrics, but doesn't give you the fantasy points in his first year. And then you're trapped. It's like you technically hit on the flop, right? You had a bad hand, right? This is where you get trapped. Like you have ace 4 or something like that, right? And you're like, oh man, this is going to be good. And you get trapped on the flop by what looks like a pretty good hand. Now this hand looks pretty good. Right now, all of a sudden you have all these outs, right? You're feeling pretty good, right? And then meanwhile, a monster hand is sneaking up on you the whole time, and you didn't even realize it because you're like, oh, like this is just fine. I'm doing great, right? This is what happens with these guys where it's like, I had an ace, the first receiver drafted, right, in his draft class. He came in, he was efficient, right? I hit something on the flop. Okay, things are working. This is good, right? This is good. When in reality, this is a hand that's actually going to get dominated because you're on the wrong team, and he had a bunch of flaws in college. He had a bunch of flaws where he lacked lateral quickness. He lacked the ability to separate. There were real issues that were surfaced during his time in college where it was like he and Treylon Burks both had some of the same issues where, hey, they look like alpha receivers, but they're not as explosive as the sort of next-gen alpha receivers like Julio Jones. They look a little more like the throwback alpha receivers that are more clashers, that are more like Brandon Marshall-style receivers. And certainly a Brandon Marshall can be that good and command 150 targets, even though he's leading the league in drops. But that is still a throwback archetype. And in today's NFL, those guys are starting to command fewer and fewer targets. And you would never know it just from the target rate and the target share from the full season that Drake London put together last year. But when you actually dig into the game-by-game statistics and the situation that he was in, he's not that impressive. And I can't believe he's being drafted in the 4th round.
Yeah, I think this is the case of people loving guys that performed well as rookies heading into year 2. That's generally been a great archetype to target. I think people are just forgetting that team situation still matters. And also, I think skill set in the context of team situation. So we talked about Christian Watson. I'm not a big Christian Watson guy. I do like Christian Watson more than Drake London, though. Because if I told you they were each hitting 6 targets a game, which guy can you squint and see being fantasy relevant? Christian Watson. He's running down the field. He's got elite speed. Drake London is really like a DeAndre Hopkins, where like DeAndre Hopkins is awesome when he's getting 11 targets a game. But if you were to just give Hopkins 6 or 7 targets a game per target, like he's not getting you that many fantasy points. It's hard to score fantasy points on like 8-yard curl routes compared to if you're running 20% of your route tree is deep, like 9s, 8s, 7s, like the posts, crossers. That's really what you want. You want those deep routes if you're going to be on this lower volume or worse offense. So for London, I'm kind of like, man, this really feels like the ceiling is last year's Michael Pittman. Well, Michael Pittman had quite a few targets on a terrible offense, and he didn't do anything. Michael Pittman had 140 targets last year, and he did nothing with them. And London is definitely not getting 140 targets.
How is London going to get 100 targets? How does London get 100 targets?
So you get 100? I mean, what is that? That's like 5 to 6. I mean, I think he'll get 100 targets. But 100 targets doesn't do anything.
I know, but he had 117 targets last year, okay? And partly that was driven by the fact that Kyle Pitts wasn't there the whole season. And they go out and draft Bijan Robinson, and their quarterback is now Desmond Ridder.
I I think there's, you know what, there's probably a better chance he's at double digits, like 98, than I'm giving him credit for, as you say that. I think the one thing we can look forward to is they did pass more with Ritter. I think part of that was trying to see what they had in Ritter. But
Just
the
game
pass volume
situations that they
did,
were in, they're actually going to
it
be
ticked
more
up a
in
little.
more competitive games this year because they've improved the defense, they've improved the offensive line. They're going to be in these low-scoring games every week. There's not going to be the pass volume that people think. There's not going to. I've heard that they're going to turn up the. I can't like the Falcons are the best team for us to talk about because you are a very sort of team first, team centric analyst. In that, and that's why your accuracy is so good because you back it out. You back out these projections and okay, how many pass attempts is this team going to realistically give us? How many rush attempts? How many rushing touchdowns? What's the overall team efficiency look like? Okay, then we can start to build a projection model around these players. I've had this conversation with Billy Muzio. We don't understand what people are doing with the Falcons. It doesn't make any sense. We can't draft any of them at ADP within 2 rounds. The only guy we can ever get is Tyler Algier or in best ball, deep, late, Mac Hollins.
So I think one thing we still haven't talked about with the Falcons, just because people would be like, well, you've said a lot of negative stuff. Give us a new angle. And I think people are waiting for the positive angle. I actually have another negative angle. So they have the second easiest schedule. So the Saints have the easiest schedule, the Falcons second easiest. But I did some pretty advanced strength of schedule metrics. Those two schedules are about 30% easier than any other schedule. Matt, you ready for the Falcons? Here's their home opponents. Carolina. The Saints. Oh, the Saints. Okay, toss up. Tampa Bay. Oof. Green Bay Packers. Houston Texans. Indianapolis Colts. Minnesota Vikings. Okay. And the Washington Commanders. There is not one very good team in there. Their away opponents. Carolina again, the Saints, the Buccaneers, the Cardinals, the worst team in the NFL. Oh, the Chicago Bears. You ready for this? They have 3 tough away games. The Detroit Lions, Jacksonville Jaguars, New York Jets. Those are their only 3 games against opponents I actually believe are really good.
Yeah,
and
but the
then,
problem
of
is
course,
the
they
Jets
also get the
defense is really
Titans.
good.
Yeah, and then they get the Titans. So, I mean, what are we hoping for? That the Lions and Jaguars games propel the fantasy stats? Because what I listed,
No, they have the Vikings in there.
Yeah, that's. I guess
They
that's
got
good. All right, so they got the
Josh.
Vikings, the Jaguars, the Lions.
Josh,
they have
they've got
3
the Vikings
games.
in there.
3 games.
There's
That's
a
it.
couple games.
There's 3 games, and pretty much every other game, it's going to be boring, low scoring, or the Falcons running the absolute piss out of the ball.
They either don't score any points, or they run the score up with Bijan.
I think Bijan's going to have like 15 touchdowns. Algier's going to have like 6. Cordero Patterson's going to have 6. There's going to be, this could be like the Eagles last year where they lead the NFL in rushing touchdowns by a good margin and they have like 11 passing touchdowns. I think that's very in the cards. Looking at how awesome this offensive line is, how awesome their running back is, and Desmond Ridder.
I mean, just to start the year with the Panthers and Packers, I mean, woof. Right? Woof. The last team you want to play is the Panthers. The last team that you want to play, because you think about this like a DFS player, right? The last team you want to play is a team with a rookie quarterback in week 1, okay, with no discernible number 1 receiver, but they do have a quality offensive line, especially a run-blocking offensive line, with a good backfield. They've got some running backs with some juice, and they've got a playmaking defense that can cause turnovers and can stifle opposing opponents and prevent them from sustaining drives. If in fiction, I asked you to write a story about the worst possible opponent for fantasy football, it would be week 1 Carolina Panthers. And they're burning one of their home games on that game.
Yeah, the Panthers and Packers, I think, are kind of the 2 teams I think I'd least want. Yeah.
So now what are we talking about? We're talking about London and Pitts are going to be getting progressively more difficult to offload as the season goes along. They definitely get Detroit at Detroit, and then they go at Jacksonville. So there's a chance that they turn things up, and then they're right back to running the ball against Houston at home, running the ball against the Commanders at home, at Tampa. It's so bad. It's so bad, Josh. It doesn't make any sense. Again, Billy and I have been beside ourselves trying to understand, because he's fighting with people in the comments. He's fighting with people on podcasts. They're trying to draft Bijan as the first running back off the board, or, middle first round. It's in some cases ahead of McCaffrey, in some cases ahead of Eckler, ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. And it's like, what? Bijan is a second rounder. Like, I know he could score a bunch of touchdowns, but there is no actual real evidence that he's this prolific pass catcher, that he's this Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey level pass catcher out of the backfield. That's not what he is. That's not what he was at Texas. That's a fiction that's been foisted upon the fantasy community for, I don't know why, because he's a beautiful player. He's a beautiful man. He's very exciting. And the fantasy gamers just want to get it all over with and get right to, hey, he's the ultimate bell cow, LaDainian Tomlinson, and we'll just tell ourselves whatever story we can to make that so and put him in the first round, even though when you back out the projections, they're going to be close to last in the league in total plays, last in total pass attempts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think Bijan's okay, kind of where he goes. He's kind of the one Falcon I've drafted the most, and it's just because he has the potential to get all the touches in the run game. He can score a ton of touchdowns because, again, they have an easy schedule, so I think they'll actually score points. And I think when you look at, hey, we've got a top 5 to top 10 offensive line and Ritter and Bijan back there, we're going to give the ball to Bijan. His volume as a receiver wasn't super high in college, but I think one thing to look at is yards per reception. I remember when we talked about this years ago, and I was like, Matt, I don't know why, but the Breakout Finder actually thinks yards per reception isn't the worst metric out there. And I think it's because in some ways it can sort of give a hint into the type of routes that a player is running, and that if your yards per reception as a receiver is like 8 or 7, like Rondale Moore or whatnot, it's like, hey, like this guy's not running down the field. Whereas the guys that are running more down the field are going to have the higher yards per reception. Bijan for his career, 60 receptions in college, 805 receiving yards, 13.5 yards per reception. He had 16.5 yards per reception this past year. That looks like a receiver stat.
16.5 yards per reception is incredible.
So I agree that he's probably not this like super high volume pass catcher, but I think there's some little bits of evidence from college. I would be lying if I said I watched the college tape for all 60 catches, but I've seen a few of them. And also you can just look at the stats and go, you know what, like this guy has to be running real routes. He can't be getting 13 yards per catch on dump offs. So I think the paths there were, I'll make a good parallel. He could be like Tony Pollard, where Tony Pollard like has never been this crazy target share guy, but he's very efficient with his targets. And he actually has like decent yards per reception, decent receiving touchdowns. I kind of think like Pollard's year last year as a receiver is like in Bijan's range of outcomes, but then Bijan just gets way more carries, touchdowns, etc. on the ground. So that's kind of how I'm viewing him. Is I actually think he's like a low percentage play to break fantasy, but I think he's a pretty high percentage play just to get enough volume. There's no role fragility with him where
he's not going to break fantasy. He's not going to break fantasy. He's not Saquon Barkley. He's not what Saquon Barkley was. We want him to be the next Saquon Barkley. We haven't had one like Barkley in a while, and he's very exciting. I understand it. But to pick him at what? 7, 8 overall? That's where you're picking him?
It's getting a little rich. I prefer him 10, 11, 12. But I wouldn't want to have no exposure if he's kind of going in that middle round 1. Because we're seeing the receivers getting pushed up, rightfully so. But what do we generally see is like people over-adjust year to year. So I think there's a good chance some of these running backs are getting pushed down more than they should. I mean, Bijan could have been like the 101 in years past.
Well,
but
it makes sense.
I wouldn't have agreed with that. But I think I like him in the back half of the first. So
Okay.
I'll say that. Like McCaffrey's the only running back that I think I would be willing to take in the first half of round 1. Nobody else.
I wouldn't draft a running back in the first half of round 1, period. But I understand what you're saying. When I was talking to Billy about this on the Dominator, there are players that can beat you, and you need to make sure you have exposure to those players. You can't be zero exposure to players that have the ability to beat you, and Bijan is a top 3 talent at the position, and he just was insured a complete bell cow role on what we talked about is a team with a good offensive line and a great schedule. So I understand that. So what you do is, for a player like Bijan, when you're setting your exposures, you just say, I want to make sure I get 5% of this guy. I'm going to set it up so I get 5% Bijan. That's the, in my where the average percent that you're going to get is what? On average, 8%, right? Any given player, 8.3, right? So if you're going to fade a player that can beat you, just make sure you're getting 5%. That is essentially a fade on a player that can beat you like Bijan, where a player that I don't believe can beat you, like let's say Jameson Williams, then you can just not draft him. They can just have zero, right? Like I even believe that Quentin Johnston can't beat me. Like I think it's theoretically possible because he's a Charger, and I am worried that it's possible that I just am wrong, that he, or not that I'm wrong, but I'm worried that he outperforms my expectations for him and that I can't victory lap like I would want to. Okay. That's the best way.
So I think
that's the best way I can describe it. So he's not versatile enough. He doesn't have the football skills, period, to perform on a week-to-week basis to give you those ceiling outcomes with any kind of regularity where it will burn you, it will hurt you, you will feel run over by that player. So there's a player where, like, you know what, I'll wind it right down to 0, no problem. Bijan Robinson, that's not what you do. You have to at least lock in your 5% because it's too scary and it's too risky to not.
Yeah, you want some Bijan. I'll maybe I'm not going to sell you on Quentin Johnston because I know like you can't be sold at this point, but I'll talk about the Chargers offense independent of Quentin Johnston. The only thing I'll say for Quentin Johnston at this point is
like you talked about the Detroit offense, independent of Jameson Williams.
So Quentin Johnston was the 33rd team's number 1 receiver. Our football scouting department had him wide receiver 1 in the class. PFF had him wide receiver 1 in the class. I'm not saying that he's definitely the wide receiver 1.
Based on what?
There have been based on overall how they graded him as like NFL ready. And like in our football sides draft guide, the PFF's football sides draft guide, Quentin Johnston was wide receiver 1 for both. I would disagree with that. I wouldn't have had him wide receiver 1, but I think it's worth noting that some people who get paid to watch football at 2 different sites both came to that conclusion. But if we just look at the Chargers offense has been top 3 in pass attempts the past 2 years. The only team ahead of them last year was the Tom Brady-led Buccaneers. Tom Brady's no longer there. Safe to assume the Chargers could very easily be number 1 in the NFL in pass attempts. You might say, well, Justin Herbert was the 4th fastest quarterback last year in pace of play. They're at their ceiling, which is true. Justin Herbert 4th in pace of play. But
his depth of target was like his target depth was near the bottom of the league. He's going to throw the ball downfield a lot more. There's a lot more juice left to squeeze here.
Oh yeah. So new offensive coordinator Kellen Moore comes in from the Cowboys. All he did with the Cowboys was lead the number 4 and number 1 scoring offenses over the past 2 years, and then he gets canned because Mike McCarthy is not very good at this. And Dak Prescott was one of the 3 quarterbacks who was faster in pace than Herbert last year. So
Herbert's going to be number 1 in pace of play this year for this reason.
And then on top of that, Herbert, the only 2 quarterbacks with a lower air yards per attempt last year that had like a requisite pass attempts was Daniel Jones and Matt Ryan. Herbert looks nothing like them. Dak Prescott with Kellen Moore was number 8 out of these 28 qualified quarterbacks. this feels like an offensive environment I would be terrified to fade. There's only one quarterback with a higher pass yards prop in the betting markets, which is Mahomes.
You cannot
And
fade Justin
also,
Herbert. No, you cannot do it.
so I just think if I love Justin Herbert and I'm going to flat plant him as my favorite fantasy quarterback for this year, where if I can get him late round 5, flag planted,
Sure.
then I just have to be in on these receivers, especially a guy with round 1 draft capital where the 33rd team scouting loved him. PFF scouting loved him. I don't actually think he should have been the wide receiver 1 of the class like they had. But I think it shows like some people out there thought this was a complete enough receiver that he was their favorite. And he plays on the Chargers. This is my favorite passing offense for this upcoming season. I think Herbert leads the NFL in passing yards. I just don't want to fade any of these receivers. And I started to do it with Mike Williams, where I was like, big Mike. I kind of feel like 2 years ago was the ceiling. And I was like, no, snap out of it. I can't fade big Mike. I'd be shocked if Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Quentin Johnston all hit. But I'm pretty sure 2 of them do. I'd put my money on Allen and Williams if I had to choose 2. They also go the earliest in fantasy. But I think it could very well be one of Allen or Williams gets hurt and it's Quentin Johnston. Or simply Quentin Johnston outplays Mike Williams because, again, he, according to many metrics, was a great receiver. Somehow he was like running downfield routes, but he also had like the best yak. Like any of those things that's like average depth of target on one axis and yak on the other. Quentin Johnston is just like in his own little island.
Do you know why that is?
Why do you think he's on his own little island?
Do you know why that is? Because he drops the passes that are deep.
I mean, I actually don't know how many drops he had. I could
No, but think about it. Think about it. If the targets that are deep are dropped and all the yards you compile are on the shorter targets with yak, then you're actually going to put up huge yak numbers with the air yards that looks almost impossible on a graph. The only way to do that would almost be to intentionally drop all the long passes. That's the only way to actually do that. And the funny thing is, Josh, he did that. He has the worst hands in college football. He led the Big 12 in drops for that reason. At his pro day, he dropped 3 straight perfect passes in his hands. He's already been dropping passes. He had a practice where he dropped 4 passes, which just doesn't happen, right, when you're just playing against air.
So then PFF, who we all know is like weirdly obsessed with drops on Twitter, they probably wouldn't have liked him.
But he did drop the passes.
Yeah.
That's
Quentin
what
Johnston
happened.
He had 6 drops last year.
No, he had more than that. No, he had more than that.
I'm looking at Sports Info Solutions.
No, he had more than that.
Who gives us data?
All the stats that we saw, I saw 8, I saw 9. Even 6 though.
6 is high, but he had like
for his
4
number of targets is relatively high. But I guarantee you had more than that. And the way he put up, if you actually watch some of these plays where he actually did get the pass, he caught it. He's completely wide open because the guy fell down. There's a very famous go route, a 9 route where Julius Brents was one of the best corners in college football, just mysteriously fell down. And there are these plays where he gets the bubble screen like Cordarrelle Patterson, and he just bullies cornerbacks and like sort of stiff arms them into the ground. But that player has never translated to the NFL. Cordarrelle Patterson's never translated to the NFL. And all the players that he's similar to in terms of dominator rating, that's why his dominator rating isn't as high as it should be. Given the metrics you talked about, his dominator rating should be like 40%. It should be up there with the Jordan Addisons, right, and the Zay Flowers. But it wasn't. It was average because he wasn't actually delivering the yards and touchdowns that he should have given the target depth, right? And it wasn't like he was getting huge target volume either. The targets he was getting were either at the line of scrimmage so he could catch them and then gobble up yak, or they were deep. Because he's so one-dimensional, he only runs that very Corey Coleman route tree where it's button hook or 9 route unless we're doing one of these design bubble screens. And we've seen that from N'Keal Harry, on down the board of that style does not translate unless the guy has actual, true, deep speed. And he doesn't. He doesn't. He was supposed to run a 4.4 at the pro day, and he ran a 4.5 something. Mm-hmm. So the list of comps is 20 deep, all busts for Quentin Johnston.
The way I think about him is I think he's probably just going to be what we hoped Gabe Davis would be. Or when I say we, I wasn't necessarily drafting him in round 4 last year, but like Gabe Davis went round 4 last year, was essentially, wow, we suddenly have the number 2 option and a great offense. We don't even need that many targets. He's running downfield. And I think the case actually made sense. Gabe Davis might have hit if he didn't sprain his ankle. I don't know. I might have been wrong on that one if he doesn't sprain his ankle. But I think that's kind of like what Quentin Johnston could be, except he's a much better receiver than Davis.
I don't know that to be true, though. I don't know that he's better. I've seen way too many first-round busts that couldn't play, where N'Keal Harry's getting outplayed by the undrafted Jacoby Myers, that just based on draft capital and just based on whatever PFF is saying, that would have been enough for me in years prior. But now I've seen so many players flame out and beat Jalen Reagor that, and these are players that, again, the scouting services had as the best receiver, right? Ahead of Justin Jefferson. And it's like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, how do you have this guy in Quentin Johnston ahead of Jackson Smith-Njigba? I have eyes. I know that Jackson Smith-Njigba put up 1,600 yards and outproduced both Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave in 2021. Just like I saw the season. I saw just the
I'd
raw
rather
statistics.
have JSN.
Yeah, I just saw the statistics from Justin Jefferson at LSU, and I'm like, there's no fucking way I'm drafting Jalen Reagor over that guy. You can't force me to do it. A Big 12 receiver. Get out of here. Like, it's not going to happen. And so when I see a service has a hot take like Quentin Johnston's better than Jackson Smith-Njigba, they lose credibility. You understand when that happens, right? And I'm talking about PFF, I'm talking about all of them. They lose credibility when they have a guy that runs 3 routes and had a 30% dominator rating ahead of Jackson Smith-Njigba, who looks like the modern, perfect NFL wide receiver. Where if I said, hey, Josh, who's the best candidate of all the receivers in the league to jump into that Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase tier in Dynasty, you would probably say Jackson Smith-Njigba.
I think I'd have Amon-Ra ahead of him, but yeah, JSN would be 4th or 5th.
Okay,
Though I will say
answer. That's the right answer. So it's Amon-Ra and then it's JSN.
So I like JSN, but to play devil's advocate, just because ultimately, like, part of why I like Quentin Johnston so much, aside from just like the Chargers, is that he's viewed as different from like JSN and Jordan Addison, even though the 3 of them went back to back picks in the NFL draft.
He's also different than Zay Flowers.
So with Jackson Smith-Njigba, 2 of his 3 college seasons were under 50 yards. I know why that was, but like Quentin Johnston has a 3-year sample of being pretty good. Jackson Smith-Njigba had 1 year. I'm not saying that that's a fluke, but I'm just saying that when you only have 1 year, it does widen the range of outcomes with downside. I agree. Jackson Smith-Njigba is my wide receiver 1 in the class. I have no issue with him being the best guy. I have him ranked ahead. He's number 1 in Dynasty among this class. But I think there are reasonable concerns, which is 1, only 1 good season, and then 2, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, if you want to talk about situation, they're actually in Seattle till 2025. Geno Smith is on a 1-year proof-it deal when you look at guaranteed money. I think Geno Smith is awesome. I think last year was for real, but the Seahawks clearly didn't, because they were like, here's a 1-year deal essentially. Do it again, and then we'll give you real money. So if he's on a team that truly doesn't have long-term stability like the Chargers, and he's competing with 2 very good players through 2025, I mean,
you would be focused on
like
every single one of the wrong details in Dynasty right there. There are people that are drafting Quentin Johnston in Dynasty because they're looking at the age of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen and going, hey, this guy's got a clear path in a year or 2 to the number 1 job with perhaps the most prolific quarterback in the NFL. This This guy oozes upside, and I'm going to draft a guy who's bad based on the fact that he's landing in the best possible situation. And we've learned this lesson so many times where it's one thing to burn a pick to the ground on upside only in a seasonal league. You can't do that with a first-round pick in Dynasty. It's just devastating. That's why I would never take that risk. Just like I view picks 1, 2, 3, 4 as very precious in seasonal leagues, I view my first-round rookie picks as precious in Dynasty, and I would never draft a bad player because of situation over a guy I know to be good. Like, I know JSN is good, and I know Zay Flowers is good. I don't think there's any doubt. They are both in bad situations, especially this year, where one guy's going to open up as the number 3 on what's going to be a prolific offense. They get to play the Rams twice and all these things. It's going to be great, okay? The other guy's on the Lamar Jackson offense, which is going to be low volume. It's going to be a mixed bag every week of who gets the touchdown, the one touchdown that he throws. It's not just that he has to compete with Bateman and Odell Beckham, and I think he's the equal of Bateman, but healthier at this point. But it's Mark Andrews, right? So you're the number 2. Best case scenario, you're the number 2 behind Mark Andrews on a run-first team run by a mobile quarterback, which is just death.
So you'd rank
wide
Quentin
receiver
Johnston
volume
ahead of Zay Flowers then? It doesn't seem like you don't like either of them necessarily.
I couldn't
but would
possibly
you still have QJ?
draft Quentin Johnston ahead of Zay Flowers, even in those situations.
Really?
Because what did Corey Coleman give you? What did Josh Doxson give you? What did Josh Palmer give you last year with a similar case to be made in the 7th round? He got steamed up because of the Chargers. It was an understandable. It was actually more understandable to me because Josh Palmer actually had some elements of his game that I thought could translate to the NFL. He could be like a mid-range possession receiver. And I thought, hey, this guy has a role in the NFL. If Keenan Allen gets hurt, he could play that Keenan Allen role, and he could see volume, and he'd be a 1,000-yard receiver, even if he is technically across the board as a prospect, just average, right? You put just an average guy in that situation, he's 800 to 1,000 yards. And what did he do? What did he put, like 760 yards last year, right? He had the same fantasy output as Drake London. Because Drake London's better, and he was a low-volume situation. Josh Palmer is exceedingly average in a high-volume situation. But that's all better than just zeros, which you get from N'Keal Harry and players like Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, I think I'd still just push back that. Like Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer as prospects, not really the same league. One guy went round 1 and was projected to go round 1. One guy was projected to go on day 3, and he went late day 2, Josh Palmer. And again, like Josh Palmer put up nearly like consistent fantasy stats. They weren't exciting, but like he was kind of like a wide receiver 3 type, and he stinks.
I mean, he was very consistent. He's so consistently average. This is how consistently average Josh Palmer is. Though his air yards went from 425 to 912, his yards per reception remained exactly the same.
Yeah.
That's another one of those crazy stat dichotomies.
That's a good one.
Isn't that crazy?
I think if Josh Palmer was starting for me in fantasy a few times last year, Quentin Johnston can definitely see the path to it. And you see it as an issue that I like the team. I would argue that we saw guys like Mecole Hardman year after year have more dynasty value than they should have because of the helmet. So I think like that actually works in his favor.
Oh, it does work in his favor. Oh, it does. Longer term, it works in his favor. But if I have to make the pick and I'm on the clock and I had this guy for his career, I'm going to get the guy that's good at football, and knowing that a year from now, 2 years from now, the situation changes. With Zay Flowers, the situation can click for him in week 1, where Bateman's not ready, and Odell Beckham Jr. just isn't good anymore. He's just dust.
Mm-hmm.
And we look up and he's got 9 targets in week 1, and he's the clear number 2 behind Mark Andrews. And that's a very exciting prospect for the rest of his career, that he's going to be, if not the number 1 option overall, at least the number 1 wide receiver in Baltimore. So I think that's a good case for Zay Flowers, that his situation actually isn't that bad. But it could be better if you had a team that actually threw the ball, like the situation for Amon-Ra, 3rd overall selection. The case is he's that guy, and it's the best possible situation. When those things come together, that's 170 targets. That's a guy that puts up 22 plus fantasy points a game.
Mm-hmm. We both like Amon-Ra.
We're going to keep coming back to that.
I love Amon-Ra.
You know what we haven't come back to, though?
We
haven't come back to your top 5 rookie receivers, your top 5 rookie running backs. We started with top 5 rookie running backs. You haven't even finished that list, I don't think, or did you? Did you actually
no,
finish
I did.
it?
Because remember, we went I was rapid fire 4 through 7. We're like Roschon.
Oh, you just went boom, 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 boom. Oh, yeah, Rachaad. And then, because you said, one of them maybe Achane in there. And then I said, that's great because Kendre Miller and Roschon Johnson have the size. They have underrated receiving skills. They are true workhorse backs in the league. They need to be put ahead of a guy like Devon Achane. You agree with that, even though Achane's situation is technically better.
Yeah, with Achane, I really like big running backs. And people are like, well, Achane's putting on weight. And I'm like, he fucking better. He weighed in at 186 or something. I was like, they're like, you realize he's 190 now, right? I'm like, oh, he better be 190 at least.
That's great.
You do realize it's the NFL now, because people keep being like, well, this guy got a workload in college and that's predictive. And I'm like, yeah, it's really predictive when you're big. Everyone's like, oh, Deuce Vaughn's going to be a thing. And I'm like, it's been 7 years since a running back received a carry in an NFL game that weighed less than him. Right. I don't know. I don't know what we're doing with these tiny backs. So Achane, I'm not fading him completely. He's still in that tier, because I'm like, there's opportunity. Tua is a friendly quarterback to running backs. Achane was a college
the coach played under Shanahan too.
Yes. Shanahan running backs. Some of the good ones have been small, but I'm also like, guys, it is a very small running back. And Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson were awesome last year. All the advanced metrics, these were 2 really good pure runners. And I think it's why the Dolphins didn't immediately go yes, we want Dalvin Cook. I think it's because they were like, hey, we got these guys. They're pretty cheap. And as runners, they actually graded out better than Dalvin last year. So I think
have a type too.
They
have a type. Yeah. They know that they like undersized. Raheem Mostert was 190 pounds coming out of Purdue. They like undersized, explosive running backs. That's their system, and that's what they're going with. That's why they drafted Achane. It's we're going to stay focused on what we do best, and we're not going to get distracted by a Dalvin Cook. I actually appreciate that. I understand that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was good team building philosophy. But again, Achane, would it shock you if he's the bad version of Tyreek Cohen, where Tyreek Cohen outside of his Pro Bowl year, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, I guess I'll take 5 carries and 4 targets. You're like, that's sure, 0 RB. I don't know. I think the upside though is that he's like Nyheim Hines, but with more carries. Because Nyheim Hines had 60 catches 2 of his first 3 years in the league. Yeah. And he was getting a little run game work. And I think that's what you want with Achane, is you're like, can he just be Nyheim Hines, but 2 more carries a game, 3 more carries a game? And then he goes from 0 RB darling to okay, we can just start him in fantasy, regardless of what our team looks like. That's kind of what you want for Achane. But I mean, injuries could happen, but at least right week 1, it's pretty thin to see how you're ever starting Achane.
I think that Achane in the second half, he really could hurt you. He could be awesome in best ball, and that's a guy that you need exposure to. He's one of those examples of a player that could burn you if you are 0 exposed, and you can't be, especially in the second half with Mostert and Jeff Wilson having 2 of the highest injury risks. They have 2 of the highest fragility ratings on the Injury Finder app, and so when you play it out and who's going to be the starter in week 10 in Miami, there's a good chance it's Achane. And just on that alone, you want some Achane, even though the success of rookie 190-pound backs is just, it's such a keyhole to fit through. It's not easy. And I also appreciate your process, man. I appreciate your process with Quentin Johnston. I get it, right? I get that you have this team-first mentality and that the team actually insulates his dynasty value to an extent, at least for a year. Totally makes sense to me. And I'm not going to like I said, I'm not going to go to the mattresses and, force you into some bet or something crazy. Like that's not, that's not how I feel about this. This is just like, I'm just explaining why I think he's bad, why I believe this is what the outcome is going to ultimately be. But when you're drafting in round 8, round 9, you're now in upside mode. And you absolutely understand that you just want exposure to the best offenses. And it is in the range of outcomes. It is absolutely possible. According to the breakout finder, I have the breakout finder right here. There is a meaningful percentage of chance that Quentin Johnston does break out. And so I respect you for that position and I understand it. Now, who else are you drafting? Not rankings, but like in
Other
best
receivers.
ball, like especially like in the double-digit rounds, what rookie receivers do you find yourself drafting in seasonal leagues?
So there's 4 guys that I wrote down. They might be everybody's 4 guys, maybe, but I'll kind of talk about why they're my 4. So one of them is Marvin Mims. I keep going back to Deshaun Jackson, a guy that was actually pretty good at receiver. You didn't even need him to run all the routes for him to produce in fantasy. Small, extremely fast. Marvin Mims was productive all 3 years in college and never had a full route share. Sean Payton really wanted him, traded up to get him in round 2. That was Payton's pick. We always like when a very hands-on coach like Sean Payton wants the guy because it's like, yeah, like this guy is advocating for him and he's trying to design year 1 of his offense. And with Russ, it's the perfect skill set. Russ likes the deep ball. Marvin Mims was really, really good on 9 routes. I think, would it be that surprising if Mims is the number 2 behind Jeudy by season's end?
No.
My take is kind of that Cortland Sutton's going to wither away. And I think either Dulcich or
going
Mims
to
becomes the
wither
number
away,
2.
Josh? Going to wither away?
Continue to wither away.
I mean, it's a 3-year
It's
continuation since
hard
that
to
one
watch
year with 1,100 yards and Drew Lock, and it's been a distant memory, just like for DJ Chark in that 1,100-yard season. Distant memory. And, when I'm looking at who they cross against, guess who they play in Week 17?
Chargers.
The Chargers. I'm pulling it up on the world-famous draft kit. It's what we did on the Dominator show. Ended up stacking the Broncos, right? Oh, you can get a backdoor stack with the Broncos. You can grab Russ late. You can then stack him with Mims and Dulcich, and then they cross against the Chargers. It's sexy.
Another guy I like, Jaden Reed. We talked about him a little bit before. I've kind of said this is Deontay Johnson. Obviously, it's not actually Deontay Johnson. His name's Jaden Reed. He might not be Deontay Johnson. But the reason that I say that is Deontay Johnson was small and really shifty and just a filthy special teamer. And that's kind of like Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed, he's small, he's shifty. A slot player, but he also played out wide in college at times. I think he's probably a slot player in the NFL, but again, Deontay often plays out wide and wins out wide. Reed has done that in college before at his size. And I like the breakout finder likes it. I love the special teams when a guy's good in the open field. And going back to Christian Watson, if I don't think that Christian Watson's this guaranteed super high volume receiver, it leaves the path for Jaden Reed. So I think that's very interesting where Jordan Love doesn't really have like any allegiance to Christian Watson. He's going to be playing with both these guys for probably his entire NFL career. I don't see it going for very many more years. So I like Jaden Reed. I kind of think he has that Deontay Johnson where we could look up and go like, oh, like this guy's suddenly getting like 8 targets a game and like doing something in PPR leagues. So to me, makes sense. Also, like, especially if the Packers offensive line crumbles, Like you do not want Christian Watson. You'd want Jayden Reed. So I think there's a few outs there where I don't think he was a second round pick in my process. I had him as like a late round 3 guy, but I'm also like not going to hate that he went earlier and maybe gets more opportunities.
He's awesome. If Jonathan Mingo is going to go early second round, then Jayden Reed better go in that same round or
what do you think
earlier.
of Deontay Johnson? Does that?
No, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. Like when I watched,
no one wants
him and
to know. No one wants to hear from us the probability that Jayden Reed out targets Christian Watson, but it's very possible. This year, it's very possible because the Christian Watson route tree is typically a deep ball route tree. And when it's Aaron Rodgers throwing those passes, that's fine. But when it's Jordan Love, potentially one of the oldest offensive lines, and you see some of these quarterbacks when they get the reins, even we talked about it, Justin Herbert is a franchise quarterback commanding a $500 million contract. Right, not quite. I know, but $500 million contract, right? And he was reduced for whatever reason last year to just basically keeping it short, keeping it checked down, and not pushing the ball downfield at all. It was crazy to watch. It was surreal. And a lot of these quarterbacks, like Blaine Gabbert, they just get in that situation where they're too scared to throw the ball downfield. They get a couple interceptions. The last thing you want for Jordan Love is to him to throw a couple interceptions in week 1. It could be devastating, right? It could just ruin him. It could ruin him. And I am not ready to make an assumption that he's comfortable pushing the ball downfield. And if that's not something that you're sure about, then how can you be drafting Christian Watson in round 3, round 4? I can't do it, right? I cannot do it.
Yeah, I think he and Reed should go closer. I also think Reed should definitely be drafted ahead of Romeo Doubs. Romeo Doubs goes many rounds earlier. So I think Reed is just severely mispriced. I don't think Reed will out-target Watson unless I think it becomes real if the offense, like if Bakhtiari gets hurt, I think that becomes more real.
No, it's in the range of outcomes where they are right now. If I just showed you ADP values and I said this guy's going at pick 40 and this guy's going at pick 160.
It's the rare case, where that guy
you'd be like, there's no way. It's impossible. Like that would never happen. And it's like, no, actually in this particular situation, it's possible. Because they're all so young. They're all under 25 years old. Every single one of them. Jordan Love. Watson. Dobbs. Reed. Reed's one of the older guys. He's 23. It's crazy.
Yeah, Luke Musgrave is 22, 23. They're rookie tight end. They're all
super young. They're all super young. So it seems fantastical that Jordan Love would have a good season. I guess it's possible. I guess it's possible that a guy that threw 20 touchdowns and 17 interceptions in his final year at Utah State, right? After what we've seen from BYU's Zach Wilson in recent years, we think that Jordan Love's going to step in and be better. I don't see it. I don't understand it. I can't process it. And yet, here we are. We're in a world where Jordan Love goes a full round earlier than Kenny Pickett. And Kenny Pickett is a mobile quarterback with job security, and he actually had impressive advanced metrics, peripheral metrics on his downfield throws and under pressure.
He also just has a better supporting cast. I mean, Deontay Johnson, better than Jayden Reed because he's actually Deontay Johnson. Christian Watson, George Pickens, probably slight edge to Watson after what we saw last year, but like wouldn't surprise me if that flipped.
They're similar players. They're similar players. They're outside players. They're making plays down the field. That's their specialty.
Yeah, and like obviously we take Pat Freiermuth with leaps and bounds ahead of Luke Musgrave. And then the Steelers' offensive line could be questionable, but they also have Darnell Washington, so they can just throw this extra tight end in there, and then it's like you have 6 blockers, and you can still have Deontay, Pickens, Freiermuth all running routes in that situation. I just think it's a better situation for Pickett. He's younger. We talked about it pre-show. He didn't bet against himself like Jordan Love. Pretty much was like, I know I'm not going to get franchise tagged. I don't want to get franchise tagged. Just give me like $5 million in guaranteed money for 2024, which
What?
I've never heard of a young quarterback.
Wait,
that
explain
wants,
this. Explain this.
So Jordan Love, when he did his 1-year extension, instead of like a franchise tag or anything like that, he guaranteed, I believe it was $5.5 million is his base salary for next year. And that's guaranteed. And this is in lieu of a franchise tag, which as we know would be, what is that, like 35 to 40 million? Something like that. So to know that 35 to 40 million was not like a realistic option where it's like, hey, you have the full season to start at quarterback. And then he was like, no. Let me lock in 13 million guaranteed with 5.5 of it for next season. This feels like a player who knows that this year is probably his only year as a full-time NFL starter. And he's kind of accepted that.
Rushman on YouTube says that Love could break out.
He could.
That Rushman has a strong take. Love can break out. That he was on the team for 3 years, and the Packers saw him for 3 years, and they clearly are in on him, or that the Packers could be what the Raiders were last year, which was this is a subtle tank year. Where going into the year, no one realized it. It felt like, oh, they're going for it this year. They really are that delusional. No, actually, it's a tank year. I believe this is a subtle tank year for the Packers, which is why I'm going under on all of the win-loss props and their over/under win totals in the futures markets. I think that's the under on the Packers is one of the smash bets, I believe, this preseason.
I would lean under. Yeah. I've only taken a few win totals. That's not one of them, but I definitely almost bet the under. But I've only bet a few. Like I took the Seahawks over. I took the Texans over. That might have been it actually. Oh, and I took the Chargers over.
Okay, well, you need an under to balance it out. You got to balance it out with the Packers under.
Maybe I do. Yeah. I took the Raiders under. We took an under. So I guess I have 4 bets out there.
That's cool. That's one of those things where it's like they just can't put the line low enough. You might as well just take it because they just can't do it.
Yeah, I got it under 7.5 wins like 3 months ago at like -110 or -120. Now 7.5 under is -200. So the public caught up and they were like, wow, this team won 6 games last year and they're way worse this year. Why is their win total at 7.5? And that was winning 6 games when like the Broncos collapsed. The Broncos aren't going to collapse again this year. This division's brutal. The Raiders schedule, let me see. I had my little spreadsheet. Yeah. The only games where I think the Raiders should be a rough pick 'em, give or take, is a few of these home games against like the Patriots, the Steelers, where like maybe it's a pick 'em. But other than that, like I actually didn't, when I looked at all 17 games, I didn't give them more than a 50% win probability for any game. When I was doing like my napkin math to create win totals, there's not a single game where I think the Raiders are legitimately going to be favored to win that game.
Who
out of all 17.
survives longer with their current team? Josh McDaniels or Bill Belichick?
I think Belichick. I think he, like, at least he has the track record. I really think McDaniels could be the first coach fired. I think the Raiders really could have the first pick next year. It's like the sneakiest landing spot for Caleb Williams.
I don't think it's that sneaky, is it?
Be kind of fun. Be like, here's a dome. You're going to play half your games in this brand new gorgeous dome. So
he's going to play in the desert regardless.
That's true. Yeah, he might as well just like start checking out apartments.
Yeah,
Las Vegas,
or start to rock climb and mountain bike and do all the things people do, in Arizona and in Nevada. I think that would be the move. That would be by the way. But the move here that I have is we actually haven't even started the main segment of the show yet. 10 burning questions. We have 10 burning questions with Josh Larky. 10 burning questions after this. They're a huge supporter of everything we do, the podcast channel, the YouTube channel. It's possible because of Rival, and they have an incredible new offer with promo code PLAYER. Promo code PLAYER, you double your deposit up to $200, and you get $25 in bonus bucks. So it's $225 additional to play in NFL preseason. You can do their props on the fantasy book where it's over, under, up to 5 guys. The more over-unders you hit, the higher your payout. And they have their challenges for the community. You can say, hey, I think that player X is going to go over this many fantasy points, and someone takes you up on it. They take the other side. It's great. I love their fantasy bingo, where you can do 5 across, you can do 4 in the corner, black it out, just predicting fantasy points on your favorite players, especially in preseason. The promo code is PLAYER, where they match your deposit up to $200 plus those $25 in bonus bucks. This offer is insane. 10 burning questions for Josh Larky. 10 burning questions. Not 5. Some say 5, I say 10. We're going to knock out a bunch of these with the Jaguars. I haven't talked about the Jaguars at all. And then I started digging into Christian Kirk versus Calvin Ridley. And it became interesting. Because I'm a Christian, just full disclosure, I believe that Christian Kirk is the true number 1 there. I'm not sold on Calvin Ridley. I want to see more. There are just types of players, especially at that ADP, where if I see red flags, I run away. If it was later in the draft, I wouldn't feel bad, but not where he's going. And unfortunately, I'm spoiling all of this. We should have just talked about this in the moment, but instead I'm prefacing this giant preface. You just started asking the questions. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm tainting the jury pool, right? I shouldn't be doing that. Let's just talk about the Jaguars. No one seems to have a strong opinion about Travis Etienne, but he came out with a super self-aware quote where he just talked about the running back position. He was like, listen, man, it's on us to be valuable as receivers given where the league is. And if we're not, we're not. And if we are, we are. And that's what it is. And I'm like, oh, wow, that guy doesn't sound like he's holding out next year. That guy sounds like he actually gets it. So that was kind of cool to hear that. And so let's just talk about the Jaguars. How do you see this team playing out this year? Like, do you see them exceeding expectations, underperforming? How much exposure are you getting to the Trevor Lawrences and the Travis Etiennes and the Calvin Ridleys? Let's talk Jaguars.
So best ball, I think it's a great team. I think they're going to score a lot of points. I think Trevor Lawrence is a fun best ball quarterback. He's going to throw for probably close to, if not at 30 touchdowns. Managed leagues, I don't quite get it with Lawrence. He goes pretty early. He doesn't run that much. I don't know if this team's necessarily going to throw quite as much as people might hope. So managed leagues, I'm a little bit less interested in Lawrence. I do like the pass game because I think they're going to score a lot of points. I think they're going to have a lot of passing yards. I think Ridley's the number 1. He had 19 fantasy points a game in 2020. Part of that, he played on a broken foot. 2021, he's chronically depressed. He plays 5 games. He's top 10 in target share. And then he disappears for a year and a half. The last time we saw him, he was awesome. I understand that he's around 29. We haven't seen it in a year and a half. However, I've seen some of those clips from training camp. Calvin Ridley is moving like a freak. When you, like what we saw from him in 2020, 2021, I think he looks better now. And it makes sense. He's no longer depressed and he's no longer playing on a broken foot. He's playing with Trevor Lawrence. And this is the first time that he's going to be playing with this awesome prime of his career quarterback without Julio Jones there. Because that's what he had, is like late prime to tail end Matt Ryan with Julio Jones. He doesn't have that. Christian Kirk is awesome as a number 2. Zay Jones is awesome as a number 2 or number 3. I think like Kirk and Zay Jones might fight for the 2 role. I think Kirk's going to get it. But I think Ridley's the number 1. I've taken him in round 3 a good amount. The last time that we saw him in fantasy football, he was going round at the end of round 1. Remember? End of round 1, Calvin Ridley. It was like, hey, do you want a 26% target share on routes down the field? Check yes or check no. And a lot of us, myself included, were like, yes, sign me up. Well, he has that now with Trevor Lawrence. Obviously, like the floor is pretty scary. I think he's one of the rare picks where even though the floor is a little scary, I'll take him round 3 just because if he didn't have the suspension and the injuries and you just told me that like Falcons Calvin Ridley was now in the Jaguars, I would take him at the end of round 1. I'd be like, this feels like a CD Lamb. So because of that, I think round 3 is a potential discount if he's back. So for me, like he's the one I'm most interested in because like Kirk and Zay Jones had the same amount of targets last year. Kirk, 7.8 targets per game. Zay Jones, 7.6 targets per game. They can fight while Ridley is the one that has shown he can command 27-28% of a team's passing offense.
This was similar to Drake London, though, where Drake London with Kyle Pitts doesn't command the targets, right? Then without Kyle Pitts, there's no one else there. It was very similar to Calvin Ridley in that one big year that he had. He did a lot of his damage in those weeks that Julio Jones was out. Julio Jones was hobbled that entire year. I believe who Calvin Ridley is a number 2 in the league, and his ceiling is what we saw in 2019, right? Where he's giving you on a, let's see, if you extrapolate it out, he played 13 games. So let's say 115 targets, right? 70, 75 catches, little over 1,000 yards, maybe pushing 1,100 yards, okay? 8 touchdowns, 15 fantasy points a game. That is who I believe Calvin Ridley is when he's right. What happened in 2020 where Matt Ryan led the league in pass attempts and Julio Jones was just this shell of himself and there was no one else there, where you had like 2,000 air yards. It was like crazy. It was like, how do you lead the league in unrealized air yards and target share and air yard share and all these things? It's like it was a wild year, right? But the unrealized air yards were a signal that he's not actually that guy. He's not an efficient number 1 receiver. And then when he actually had to play that role for those 5 games in 2021, he was grossly inefficient, right? He was like number 72 in yards per route
he was terrible.
Run. He was terrible. He was terrible. So I believe
Pitts wasn't efficient either, though.
Everything is set up for success for him in a way that was almost like the Truman Show in 2020. 2021, I believe it was a cursed season for him, and he wasn't right mentally or physically, probably. And then what does this reduce us to? Well, it boils down to, okay, we throw out 2021, throw out 2020 for opposite reasons, and then we throw out his rookie year because he was a rookie. What does that bring us? In his age 24 season, right, he was about a middling wide receiver 2. When he was in his prime, that's who he is. If I had to figure out who Calvin Ridley is, I think that's who he is. Okay. But he's not that guy anymore. He's going to be 29 this year, and he hasn't played in 2 years. So instead of, I'm drafting a guy in the 3rd round to be what he was in 2019, where that's essentially best case scenario.
I mean, yeah, that sounds pretty bleak. So one thing I'll say is you talk about how like he didn't have a lot of target competition with the Falcons. We discussed how he has so much target competition because of Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Engram. 1 year ago, he would have had no target competition in this offense. We think of Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Evan Engram as target competition because of what Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson did with that offense last year. So I'm not disagreeing with like I think Ridley's a very risky pick. I'm taking that swing at times.
Too risky for 3rd round. That's all I'm saying.
So who are you just drafting? No Jaguars then? Because maybe I can sell you on ETN a little bit.
Well, that's the thing. Like I'm curious about ETN. Well, by the way, a draft. You don't like Christian Kirk? Like round 6,
Oh,
round 7?
No, I'm drafting some of him. I thought you didn't like any of the Jaguars. The
No,
way
no,
you
no, no,
initially
no, no,
framed
no,
it.
no, no.
So you just think Ridley goes too early for this
no, no,
ambiguous
no. Oh
receiver
no,
one?
I
Oh, I like Christian Kirk a lot. Yeah.
I'm asking you this question because I know that you do deep dives on these individual teams in order to build your projections out, which is why I respect your process so much. And the Jaguars are a weird team in that they are definitely going to be a great offense. They're one of the favorites to win the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
They're certainly going to win their division, so that makes them a higher likelihood of winning the AFC and then by extension winning the Super Bowl. Like this is a Super Bowl contending team. It's an exciting offense. There's an ascending young quarterback that is sort of a prince that was promised. And yet very few people talk about this team ever on podcasts or at any point, right, on social media at all. And then when I think about their players, there's a bunch of enigmas. Trevor Lawrence is very much an enigma, and you just said it. You're like, he's a great best ball guy, but I don't like him in managed leagues. Like, that sounds like an enigma to me, right? Calvin Ridley's the ultimate enigma where no one knows what the hell he is. Looks great in training camp, but the history of players that have taken multiple years off, like, whatever it's going to be, by the time he actually sets foot on an NFL field, it'll be like it'll be 22.5 months without playing NFL football. Okay.
Yeah, that's concerning.
Yeah, and the track record from Le'Veon Bell, Josh Gordon, going all the way back is terrifying. And so the downside with him is Josh Gordon, that he's just skinny Josh Gordon. That's the downside, right? And not looking at anything beyond just, hey, these guys missed games because they broke league rules or they had to take time away from the team. And that is what was going on with Calvin Ridley. If we're trying to find comps, I think that the reason why Josh Gordon's not the greatest comp is that Josh Gordon was a hell of a lot bigger. It was like 30 pounds heavier. He's a very different player. Like, so if we're looking at, archetype, play style, they're not similar, but it's hard to find comps. Randy Moss, like, it's just hard to find comps of guys that have sat out that much time and come back. And to me, in the third round, it's not worth it. It's never worth it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that he's in that class of player that could really burn you. I think he could, right? I think that he could be very good. I think it's possible that what was he, the wide receiver 4? So I think maybe his ultimate absolute ceiling is like wide receiver 8. You definitely want some exposure to that guy. So there's some, you could follow the Bijan rule or be like, hey, if you're looking at your exposures, just fade him, but get 5%. Right? Like, I'm fading Bijan, but I'm not drafting him. Right? You could get to that point with Calvin Ridley, and you're like, hey, I am terrified, but he could, in this offense, if he is somehow that guy from 2020, then I don't want to take the risk. I don't want to be looking at zero Calvin Ridley. It's too terrifying. So he's both terrifying on both ends. He's terrifying to draft. He's terrifying to not draft. So what do you do in that situation?
Yeah.
You go like 5%.
I like that stance. Yeah, I've been around even on the field probably. I think the guy I'm probably highest on at this point, out of the two early guys, like I have a lot of Christian Kirk. Seems like you do too, but like it's also easier if a guy goes in like round 6, round 7. I really like Travis Etienne. People don't talk about him. And I think it's because he didn't put up fantasy points last year, even as the starter.
Nobody talks about this guy ever.
So he didn't put up fantasy points, which is very frustrating. But what I like to do is I like to zoom out, and I like to just look at like who the player is. And I did this last year, and I don't know if it was a hit or not, but like I had Jefferson ahead of Kupp in my rankings. I was one of the few people that did it. It ended up like kind of hitting because Kupp got injured, and I didn't want to like victory lap the injury, but I was like, guys, if we just look in a vacuum, one of these dudes is like 6 years younger with like the best historic start ever. The other guy now has Allen Robinson, who ended up being a bust, but I was like, the other guy like got target competition injected and is older with an injury history. And I think with ETN, like we can kind of zoom out and forget the fantasy points and just say, this is a running back who has just enough size. He's extremely fast. He had over 1,000 receiving yards his 2 final seasons in college with Trevor Lawrence, his same quarterback, and he's capable of handling 20 to 25 carries in a game if needed on a great offense. I don't think we need to know anything more than that. Oh, yeah, and by the way, he's got round 1 draft capital. He's insulated. Like, I'm seeing reports like Tank Bigsby's hitting the hole, and like, cool. They took him in round 3. Tank Bigsby can have a goal line carry occasionally. I don't know. Like, I don't want Travis Etienne to get 100% of the work. But if we know that we're going to get a guy that's going to get a ton of touches in a great offense with the potential for receiving, we should want that. Etienne had 5 touchdowns last year on 255 touches. I think that improves. Like, I have Etienne as my RB10. I think of him as a late 3rd round pick. I actually, if I had to do one draft in a vacuum, would probably take Etienne ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs this season for redraft. And it seems crazy that some people
Why is
are
that
just
crazy? That seems
they're
perfectly
very bored
reasonable
with
to
Etienne.
me.
And I'm like, guys, Etienne's going to have way more carries than Gibbs. And like the targets might not be that different where that it makes up for it. Like I think Etienne at this point, how many running backs get most of their team's touches and they get the high value ones and they're young and insulated in the offense? Like Etienne sometimes goes after Najee Harris. And I'm like, these guys project for similar workloads. One of them's just on a way better offense. Like, I don't
One of
even
them's
hate
just way
Najee
better.
Harris
Travis Etienne's a good player.
I don't even think Harris is like a terrible pick in round 4. I'm like, fine. Like, take him around 4. He's going to get volume. His role is safe. But like Etienne,
is his role that safe with Jalen Warren? I don't even think that's true.
Oh God. So my quick rant on these backup running backs is everyone's always like, did you know the backup was more efficient?
Well,
yeah, they should be. People like ignore how the body works. If I run 3 miles as fast as I can, the first mile is going to be the fastest. Like if I'm actually running all 3 at full effort the whole time, my full effort will be slower on mile 3. That's how these running backs are. It's why like when Tony Pollard was less efficient than Zeke, I was like, yeah, Tony Pollard's probably better. Do I think he's like 40% better? No, it's because he's getting fewer touches. Jalen Warren was awesome last year.
Well, he might be better. He might be that much better.
So
Pollard might be that much better than Zeke. The problem is it's not so much Warren. It's that Najee Harris was never that good. He was another one of these manufactured Alabama players.
I mean, I would agree with that. I remember we talked and I was like, Etienne's my RB1 in this class. It looked bleak when Etienne got hurt.
This is the year, man.
And now
this is the year that Etienne finally establishes himself. Like, hey, back from that draft class from 3 years ago, I'm the man.
Yeah, like if Etienne was like the RB4 and he had like 250 carries and like 50 receptions and like 14 touchdowns, I'd be
there are people that don't believe he can catch 50 passes. They don't think he can do it.
Yeah, just look at college. He had like almost 600 receiving yards his final year in college.
Yeah. He had 48 catches. The year prior, he had 37. That was the number that Zach Charbonnet had as a senior.
It makes sense that he also didn't catch that many passes for a couple of reasons. One, last year, all the receivers were so healthy. Literally everybody was super healthy, like pretty like 16 games each. If it was either 16 or 17 games for like Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Marvin Jones. Evan Engram, I think, had his first 17 game season or second, whatever it was. Like Engram was super healthy. Everyone was super healthy. It was a new offense. Etienne's first actual NFL action. Wouldn't shock me if they expanded his role and if the receivers aren't quite as healthy. And also the offensive line looks pretty bad, which could be very good for Etienne dump-offs. We've already got Cam Robinson suspended for the first, I think, 6 games. It's probably a bottom 5 unit. I wouldn't say it's like disastrous. It's certainly better than like the Titans, but it's probably going to be a liability at times. And these are all situations that can help Etienne's pass game role where the fantasy points are really scored.
I'm just an old, cranky fantasy gamer now. Like, I have no patience for Jahmyr Gibbs. I have no patience for Breece Hall and his knee recovery. I just have no patience. If I'm drafting a running back in round 3 or early round 4, I'm just going to draft Travis Etienne because I know what I'm getting. This guy is heading into his 3rd year. This is his year. This is the year to get him, right? He runs a 4.5 flat. That's like a 105.0 speed score with an above average burst. He was a prolific college receiver. He's established himself as the workhorse back in Jacksonville, one of the league's top offenses. There's nothing not to like except the fact that for whatever reason, he was capped at 3 catches per game last year. I don't know why that was, and it's very weird, and I wish it wasn't so, but I am confident that he is going to have a 5-catch game this year. Very confident. Okay.
Oh yeah, he's not going to be stuck at 3 this year.
I mean, it's not going to happen. Like, that was his first year as an NFL running back. He missed the whole year prior, right? And it just makes sense. JaMychal Hasty actually had more experience operating as a satellite back in an NFL offense and caught some more passes in some of these games. Understandable. But that doesn't mean that Travis Etienne can't catch, right? That's not it. It cuts both ways, right? A guy can have a 37-catch season and actually not be that dynamic in the passing game. They could have all been dump-offs and system-based like Zach Charbonnet. Or a guy can catch 60 passes or 60 targets, 48 passes in college and actually not be that elite receiver that you thought he was in college. Both things happen all the time, right? Is the guy that has the great reception count in college never actually translates that to the NFL, and then vice versa. A guy like Bijan Robinson could double his college reception count, his maximum college receptions in his first year with the Falcons. I'm open to all of these things happening, especially when it comes to these elite talents. The least likely of all those scenarios is the guy with 48 catches can't catch. That's actually the least likely, Josh, of all those scenarios. And it was the guy that had 48 catches.
It's the same quarterback
in the Clemson offense with real true weapons, commanding targets in all these different levels of the field with Trevor Lawrence, his current quarterback, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, he's just an easy smash in the 4th round. People's excuses for him are pretty strange. Tank Bigsby is going to steal goal line work. Well, I'll believe it when I see it. He was taken in round 3. I did not think Bigsby was a round 3 prospect.
Who did?
He was. Most mocks did not have him going quite that early. They had him.
Wouldn't you take it
if
it were you? Like you said, oh, if it was for my life and it was in a vacuum and we were in space and there was no oxygen, right, and all these things, right? I would take ETN over Gibbs. I would too.
Yes.
I would take ETN over Gibbs just on the simple principle that I know what ETN is, and Gibbs is trying to be ETN eventually, maybe in the NFL. I can just get the guy who already is that guy, right? So that's fine. And then Breece Hall is trying to be ETN, but Travis Etienne actually has 2 working knees, and Breece Hall doesn't. So why can't I just take the guy who is established and is in his prime? He's 24.5 years old in a great team situation.
Yeah, I love Etienne. I like Breece Hall as well.
Would you take Etienne or Breece Hall?
I would. Oh man, I think if I was, that's tough. Like if I had one draft, I think the case for Breece Hall is that he can pretty easily be the best running back in fantasy for the final 6 games of the year when he's fully healthy with Aaron Rodgers, who's really good for running backs, where he's willing to check the ball down, but he also runs efficient offenses. Breece Hall had over 16 fantasy points a game last year. He averaged 7 carries per game in the month of September. That was 3 of his 7 games. He had snap shares below 30%, 2 of those 7 games. He reached a 60% snap share in only 3 of those 7 games. Like everything was working against Breece Hall from a playing time perspective last year as a rookie, and he still had over 16 fantasy points a game. So I think for him, it's all right, even if he's not fully back with the workload, this is a guy that we've seen get there on very few touches. So I'm not willing.
He's great.
To fade
He's an elite player. I just hate drafting injured players. I hate drafting Kenneth Walker. I hate drafting Cooper Kupp. I hate drafting anyone, J.K. Dobbins. Go down the list.
So if we knew that Breece Hall was healthy, which is an if, and that Dalvin Cook wouldn't sign there, which it doesn't seem like he will at this point. It seems like Cook wanted 3 for $30. And the Jets were like, we'll give you a year, $5 million, which I mean, like that doesn't work. I think Breece Hall goes ahead of Bijan. I think he's the mid round 1 running back in fantasy if we knew that. So if we knew that he was healthy and stuff, like you'd be like, oh, this guy literally just showed us that he's an absolute bell cow and now he's in an awesome offense. And I think that's the case for like Breece Hall. And I think
that's
with ETN,
why if we're playing this game of, okay, who qualifies for the 5% rule? Like we got the argument. I'm actually 50-50 whether Calvin Ridley qualifies for the 5% rule of exposure.
I'd say Breece Hall more qualifies than Ridley, myself at least.
There's so much target competition, including Travis Etienne in Jacksonville, that actually would be fine going 0 Calvin Ridley, and his number is 0. We talked about 5% at a minimum for Bijan Robinson because he can rip your face off. Breece Hall can especially rip your face off in best ball in those final 6 weeks. So you have to have 5% Breece Hall in best ball. That's without question. In seasonal leagues, managed leagues, you can trade for him. Like that I don't mind, generally avoiding him. In high stakes leagues, I could see generally avoiding him because he's week 6, 7, he's going to be himself.
He's probably still startable earlier. The way I see it is like Breece Hall is probably an RB2 the first few weeks, and you're like, all right, I guess I'm starting a fantasy RB2. And then all of a sudden it's going to flip. We saw it with Saquon Barkley. Remember Saquon Barkley before he stepped on someone's foot? Saquon Barkley the first few weeks of 2 years ago was like, I guess RB2. It's boring, but whatever. And then all of a sudden it was like, boom, 20 plus fantasy points. Boom, 20 plus fantasy points. Stepped on a foot. So he had back-to-back 20 plus fantasy point weeks. He looked awesome. And then he stepped on a dude's foot, which is very, very unlucky. I think that's what we're probably going to see from Breece Hall is all of a sudden, assuming he doesn't step on someone's foot 5-6 weeks in, suddenly you go, wait, these aren't RB2 numbers anymore. We're getting legitimately 17 to 25 fantasy points every week.
His yards per touch was 6.9. That's unsustainable. His fantasy points per game of 16.4 compares to his expected fantasy points per game, a formula.
He overperformed. Yeah.
Right. A formula that you wrote. A formula that you wrote.
Yeah, he overperformed.
It's funny to say. It's a fun thing to say. Was 14.7. So we just got to be a little bit careful here. Talking about him as a first round pick, him breaking fantasy, all these things in the last 6 weeks. I don't know why they're out here drafting Israel Abanikanda in the 5th round. Something is why aren't they giving him more snaps? He didn't even get a 50% snap share when he was healthy. It's just, something is not right. There's a disconnect, an incongruence between how the Jets feel about Breece Hall and how we as fantasy gamers feel. It makes me a tinge nervous that this is a DeAndre Swift scenario all over again. I don't know what's going on. I just don't love these signals from the Jets about Breece Hall, and I don't love them bringing in Dalvin Cook for a workout. I don't love any of it. It all makes me nervous that there's something else going on behind the scenes where the Jets aren't as bullish on Breece Hall as literally everyone in fantasy, and part of that is due to the fact that he had a very fortunate outcome and an unsustainable yards per touch as a rookie. That said, he is one of these rare players that can carry a fantasy team, especially in the fantasy playoffs. And you need to have some exposure to him. He absolutely qualifies for that 5% rule.
Yeah, I'd agree there. Not much more to add. I mean, Israel Abanikanda, I liked him pre-draft, but I'm not going to get scared off Breece Hall because I took a running back in the 5th round. They brought Dalvin Cook in for a workout, but I think it makes sense. I don't love any of these backups like Michael Carter, Israel Abanikanda. If you have Super Bowl aspirations like they do, and your top running back isn't healthy, which I agree, it's a risk. He's currently not healthy. It makes sense that they talk to veterans and they'd be like, hey, Dalvin Cook, we'd love to have you. And what they kind of said, it seemed from reading the reports, was they were like, we would love you to be a workhorse running back the first few weeks, and then you'll take a complimentary role to Breece Hall. And that's why we're offering you 1 year, $5 million. And I think Dalvin Cook was like, I want 3 for 30. I'm still a workhorse. And they were like, no. You can be a workhorse for a month. Breece Hall is our guy. And I think that's why Cook probably isn't going to sign there, is that the Jets are very set on when Breece Hall is fully healthy. This is their running back in what they believe is going to be a pretty elite offense. So yeah, my exposure to him is going to be probably below like an ETN, just because with ETN, like he's currently healthy and he's also on a really good offense. But I understand it with Breece Hall, where it's like, could you see him being like the best running back in fantasy from weeks 15 through 17? Because I think that's pretty easy to see. Like he's ramped up at that point. It's not like you're burning a pick if he's getting like a 50 to 60% snap share. Like you can survive in fantasy if your 4th round pick gives you RB2 numbers most of the season. You're not like happy about it, but like you can very easily build a team around it. And then like week 15 hits and you're like, oh my God, like this guy's rounding into form and he's the best running back in fantasy.
World famous draft kit, looking at the schedule: Miami, Atlanta, Houston, Miami, Washington, and they round it out at Cleveland. It's interesting.
It's definitely not a great schedule.
It's not the greatest schedule. It's not great at the very end. It gets bad, right? Mm-hmm. It's nice when he's playing Atlanta and Houston in week 13 and 14, and then it starts to get annoying, right? Commanders is an annoying team to play. They wall off the run, but what you said is important. The guys that can truly rip your face off, that you are going to want 5% exposure to, are the guys that can be true NFL bell cows. That's not Jahmyr Gibbs. You're not actually risking much doing a full fade on Jahmyr Gibbs, because full-blown bell cow is never in his range of outcomes, and therefore like 20 fantasy points a game is not really something that's attainable for Jahmyr Gibbs in year 1. Maybe when you play it out down the road, it's possible that he can grow into this satellite back plus role and be trusted in red zone situations in 2025, like Austin Eckler eventually became, or Christian McCaffrey. It took him a year. Jahmyr Gibbs, that's not in his range of outcomes. So he's a guy where I'm fine with a full fade, because the workhorse bell cow role isn't there for him. But with Hall, you're right, it is there for them, and you got to be careful when it's there. When it's there, and it's an improving offense, you got to be careful. You got to make sure you have some of that guy.
Yeah, nothing more to add there.
But you can fully fade Alexander Mattison, because unlike Breece Hall, he's just not good.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing is when people go, oh, like Dalvin Cook was declining, it's Mattison's turn. And I'm like, all right, so Dalvin Cook was declining, and they always went with Dalvin Cook. And that this past season was Mattison's fewest carries and total yards in his 4-year career. So I'm like, if Dalvin Cook was really declining that much, Mattison would have done something. The past 2 years, Mattison had 3.7 and then 3.8 yards per carry. The past 2 years, Dalvin Cook had 4.7 and 4.4. On average, 0.82 more yards per carry for Dalvin Cook. And again, we go back to, well, he was the starter. He's more tired on a per play basis, and he's still greatly outproducing Mattison. And then my other favorite thing with Mattison is when people go, I don't think you realize this guy's been putting up 20 something fantasy points a game when he's the starter. All right, everyone, let's deep dive into the 5 games where Mattison saw a snap share above 50%. Because it's the luckiest 5-game stretch I have ever seen. 3 of those 5 games were against the Lions. And another one of those games was against the Seahawks. Those years, the Lions and Seahawks were top 3 in fantasy points allowed to running backs. 4 of his 5 starts were against 3 of the easiest defenses. I'm like, what are we doing here? You can't just tell me Mattison was good in relief without being like, oh, like I wonder why he got the Lions 3 times. Maybe this is like the world's luckiest guy. And then you would look at the contract, and every running back is rebelling. They hate their contracts. They want to be paid more per touch, and they deserve it. But Alexander Mattison signs his 2-year, $7 million deal, and suddenly he wants 350 touches. Get out of here. Like the Vikings they want Mattison to be the 1A in a committee. And recent reports have even said Ty Chandler and Kene Nwangwu have not been living up to the RB2 role. Dwayne McBride is too similar to Mattison. I don't think McBride's going to be active on game days. He's basically like Alexander Mattison insurance. They're quite possibly adding another running back to this room to play like RB2, which could very well be terrible for Mattison because right now, like I'm already not that excited and there's nobody else there. Just imagine once someone else lands there. So there's just a lot working against him.
Well, here's the problem.
And I think
for Dwayne McBride, he doesn't play on special teams and he's not active in the passing game. And if you already have Alexander Mattison, like you're saying, those that are drafting McBride as a sleeper running back in deep leagues, drafting him in best ball, whatever it is, or even that have him in Dynasty, just know that he's going to be a game day inactive, like you said.
Yes, I think like if you're drafting him now, or like if you take him in Dynasty, be prepared for his value to drop further once week 1 happens. And people are like, what, he's a healthy scratch? Like, yeah. Like you said, he had, I think.
Of course. That's every look at the backfield.
He doesn't catch passes.
Most teams have 3 active running backs, and one of them is on special teams, and that's in Nwangwu. Then who's better in the passing game, Chandler or McBride? It's going to be Chandler for the 2-minute drill or for the third downs. It's easy. It's easy to figure out how that's all going to play out. But eventually, they're going to give the ball to McBride, and he's going to look better because he is better as a runner than Alexander Mattison. Now, I've seen some Alexander Mattison runs from 2020, and he looked damn good. I have to tell you.
3 years ago. Yeah.
3 years ago, he looked good. Something happened to him in the last 3 to 4 years. I don't know what's happened to him, but he's gotten progressively less efficient, and he's not what he was. He was this slashing cutback runner that was an impressive young NFL running back. He isn't that anymore. Like, you want to show me some tape from 2019? Great. It's impressive. I get it. But he's not that guy anymore. He's just not.
Yeah, I think at this point, Mattison, I mean, I like the offense. The offensive line is fine. It's just one of those players where year after year, these career backups don't last as a starter. And I mean, like a Tony Pollard thing, it's like, well, we always thought this guy was more talented. It's not even like every year we were like, man, like Madison's going to pop. It was like, no, like we like him as a handcuff. And people are like, well, how can you like him as a handcuff, but then not like him as a starter? And it's like, well, we go back to the whole, like, if I run 3 miles full speed, the 3rd mile I run slower. Alexander Mattison has never shown in the NFL that he can run that 3rd mile quickly. It's why Zeke was always so good in his prime. It wasn't even that like Zeke per carry was the greatest running back ever. It was that his first carry of the game and 20th carry of the game looked the same in his prime. You like the guy didn't get tired. It was exactly what you wanted every play. And I think Madison's going to be in a pretty rude awekening where he's never really had volume. And you think
his 3rd game in a row as a starter, he's like, oh, this is hard.
Yeah, he's like, what? He's like, where the hell are the Lions? So I don't get to play the Lions for 60% of my games.
Yeah. He's
going to be like, I only get to play them twice in 17 games. I thought I played them 3 times every 5 games.
It's a bummer.
Where are my Lions? Yeah. It's going to be a big wake-up call when he learns that NFL schedules don't give you top 3 defenses for your position week after week.
So let's continue here. There's a few more players I want to sort of heat check you on because people are really starting to steam up Anthony Richardson, and he's the no-brainer late round quarterback. If you're gonna like, I did a top 5 late round Konami quarterbacks. My favorite, as everyone knows at this point, Kenny Pickett. But I had to put, obligatory Anthony Richardson on there, right? And the guys at Player Profile, they're not as into Anthony Richardson as Twitter is.
Yeah, I mentioned I had my Richardson monologue. I actually did a very big deep dive on this So let's talk about rookie quarterbacks. Because Anthony Richardson is a rookie quarterback, Richardson generally goes to the QB 10 or QB 11 in redraft. That's a QB 1 price tag. The past 15 years, there have been 4 quarterbacks that have paid off that type of price tag. Deshaun Watson in 7 games before his injury, Cam Newton, Justin Herbert, and Robert Griffin III. Those 4 quarterbacks the past 15 years would have smashed that ADP. The 5th best rookie season from a quarterback was Dak Prescott. The 6th best was Kyler Murray. Dak Prescott would have been the QB 13 last year. If we took Dak Prescott's rookie season and airdropped it into 2022, that is the 5th best rookie quarterback season over the past 15 years. Every 3 years, we get a season as good as Dak, and it's not even a fantasy QB1 season. Richardson. Let's talk about Anthony Richardson. So he was terrible at pretty much everything in college except being athletic and avoiding sacks. His completion rate, his 1 year as a starter, was below 54%. His touchdown to interception ratio was 17-9. And for being the most athletic quarterback in NFL history, Anthony Richardson had 103 rush attempts for 650 yards and 9 touchdowns. Well, let's put this into perspective because we really want him to become either Deshaun Watson, Cam Newton, Justin Herbert, or Robert Griffin III. Deshaun Watson.
Cam Newton. Cam Newton's rookie year was impressive.
We'll get to Cam in just a second. So we'll start with Deshaun Watson, who had the best fantasy season as a rookie. 3 times the career pass attempts in college, more than 3 times the career passing yards, 3.5 times the career passing touchdowns, and Watson had nearly 2,000 rushing yards in college. In fact, Watson's best rushing season was not 100 carries for 650 yards. It was 207 carries for over 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns. Watson was way better as a passer. He was way more mobile, way more experienced. Cam Newton, over 10 yards per attempt at Auburn, which is better than Richardson's 7.8 at Florida. Also, Cam Newton was more than double the rusher of Richardson. You could take Richardson's junior year last year and double his rushing stats, and they're still not even close to Cam Newton. I'm not kidding. Cam Newton had 264 rush attempts, 1,473 rushing yards, and 20 rushing touchdowns. If you think he's Cam Newton, then like, what the heck was Cam Newton? Cam Newton was like super Newton. They're not even close. Justin Herbert hit nearly 10 yards per attempt, his best college season. Just like Deshaun Watson, nearly 3 times the career passing stats. Herbert actually had 4 times the career passing touchdowns. And then Robert Griffin III, again, similar theme, multi-year starter in college, 3 times the career passing stats of Richardson. And RG3's best rushing season was 30% better than Richardson. Even Kyler Murray, who I think is the best comparison because he started 1 season in college and was awesome, and then got taken at 101, which again, Richardson was not taken at 101. Kyler Murray had 2 times the passing touchdowns in his career as Richardson, even though Kyler didn't really play anymore. How does Kyler have 2 times the career passing touchdowns, but only 25% more pass attempts in college? I'm like, what? How is Kyler's stats so much better when they didn't even pass that differently in terms of attempts? Well, it's because Kyler had 11.5 yards per attempt.
Yeah, I was going to say Kyler was one of the most efficient passers ever in college.
And then he ran for 60% more yards and 30% more touchdowns. Quarterback, we know it. It's the most demanding sport to play in all of sports. And this position's just brutal. And maybe Richardson's great in fantasy down the line. But again, the reason we don't see rookie quarterbacks do it is because it is so difficult. The offensive line for the Colts is fine. Their receiving weapons are probably below average. You cannot convince me that Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce and Jelani Woods are this magical trio that's going to elevate Richardson. Oh, but Josh, Shane Steichen, did you know that he has talked to Jalen Hurts before and that he coached him as offensive coordinator? Yeah, Jalen Hurts was so good last year, behind the league's best offensive line, with 2 of the top 10 receivers in the NFL and a top 10 tight end. There is none of that for Richardson. I don't know what we're doing right now. Anthony Richardson is the worst pick you can make in fantasy at quarterback, and I don't think it's close.
Whoa, really? The worst?
Yeah, where is I don't understand this upside. He's never done it rushing. He's never done it passing. He is a clear project quarterback. I like him in Dynasty. He was my QB1 in Superflex.
Would you take
because
Bijan or Anthony Richardson in a Superflex Dynasty rookie draft?
I don't care that much. I would take Bijan, but it's not one of those things where like
Josh, you just had that whole rant. You need to come strong, Bijan. You were talking about how we need to take Bijan in the middle of the first round. You just spent 5 minutes ranting about how Anthony Richardson's overrated. You need to come hard. It's got to be Bijan. You got to practice this. It's got to be Bijan Robinson at the 101.
It's obviously Bijan.
It's Bijan. It's obviously Bijan.
I just like to take quarterbacks in Superflex.
I know. I asked you that question because I know you're a big quarterbacks early in Superflex.
I still would take Bijan just because I think there's probably a buying opportunity with Richardson. I think he's going to be so bad this year. I think the Colts could be an unwatchable offense at times. I don't think people are fully ready for it. Like I did part of when I did this study with 15 years of rookie quarterbacks. You want to know what they average when you pace them out for 17 games?
Tell me.
They average a 6-11 season. Rookie quarterbacks stink.
Brutal.
And that includes Brock Purdy. It would have been worse probably last year, but fortunately I did the study with Brock Purdy, who ups that because he was undefeated. So yeah, I mean, maybe you can make me like not hate Richardson quite as much, but as of right now, I'm just like, guys, if I want a rushing quarterback, Daniel Jones goes later. Daniel Jones just had over 700 rushing yards, which is more than Richardson had last year. And Daniel Jones has a better play caller potentially. I like Brian Daboll more than Shane Steichen, being that Brian Daboll just did it last year with Daniel Jones in a pretty bad situation. And Shane Steichen did it with Jalen Hurts in the best situation in the league. We have to be concerned about the Colts. I will never draft Michael Pittman. If Michael Pittman couldn't get it done in fantasy with the 8th most pass attempts last year, what do you think is going to happen when his team suddenly bottom 3 in pass attempts? And Alec Pierce is another year experienced. Like the Colts are the biggest fantasy landmine team right now that's out there.
Oh, I'm so glad we talked about this. Oh my God, I'm so glad we talked about this. Yeah, I mean, I prefer Geno Smith because of the weapons and that this is going to be
easily
high-scoring offense. Easily, right? Easily, but that's not necessarily that they have similar ADPs.
Geno goes like a touch later oftentimes.
Yeah. Kenneth Pickett Sr. goes much later. Much
Kenny
later.
Pickett will probably outscore Richardson by like in fantasy points per game.
The place that I've always said you cannot draft him are seasonal superflex leagues. You absolutely can. Yes, you could get away with it in a seasonal 1 quarterback league that's a managed league because you can draft a second quarterback. In the FFPC, most teams draft 2 quarterbacks. You draft a backup quarterback, so you can just draft Richardson and Pickett, and it won't hurt you that much to just churn him. And if you draft him in Dynasty, there's plenty of flipping opportunity. If you want to trade him, you can. And then he also could end up being very good because he does have the arm strength. He was a good decision maker. There are outcomes where he's Newton, but he's also very good in 2025. So there's also a good case to be made that he's the clear 102 in Superflex. All good. But like in the Scott Fish Bowl, for example, one of the guys I wasn't even thinking about targeting was Anthony Richardson, in that you can't miss on an early quarterback in a Superflex league. It's devastating. You can't do it. You have to treat these guys, like I said, treat them as precious, where I'd much rather go with more of a pocket passer in a Superflex league because it's not like you can just go to the waiver wire and replace them. Right? So that's the area where I would say absolutely no way I'm not doing it. Anthony Richardson in a 2 QB league this year. Let someone else have him and then deal with that problem.
Our good friend Dave Kluge, I was at the Denver live draft for the Scott Fish Bowl. I took Josh Allen round 1. I was going to take Tua Tagovailoa round 2. And Dave was like, do you want to have fun for charity? And I was like, no, Dave, I really don't. And he was like, Anthony Richardson with this rushing bonus. And I chugged a Bloody Mary and I took Richardson and I hated myself for it. And then I even bet against myself because later in like the final rounds, I took Minshew. And then I even took Jacoby Brissett because I realized I was, like you said, I was terrified. And I won't do that again. I didn't like that feeling. I should have just taken Tua. 6-point pass touchdown. I messed up there. So Dave,
you've taken Deshaun Watson? You couldn't have taken Deshaun Watson, right?
No, he wasn't available. No, I had the 102, so I took Allen at 2, and then I had the 211.
Mm-hmm.
So I should have just taken Tua. 6-point pass touchdown. Set it and forget it.
I would have gone Tua there. Yeah, that's too bad. It's okay. It's okay. Listen, man.
Yeah.
You're drinking Bloody Marys. You're having fun. It's for charity. Your buddy's pressuring you. I totally get it. I would have gone Richardson too. I would have done
it. I should have taken Tua.
Did you at least get Pickett later?
No, I already had Josh Allen and I had Richardson. I took quarterbacks with pick 1 and 2. It didn't feel like I should take another one till late. So
no,
that's why
I'm only saying that because I saw drafts where Pickett was falling to like the 9th round.
No, he went a little earlier for us. I think he went 7th, which is still like great. I mean, if I went late quarterback, I would have loved him there.
I did that. I was like, I think I took him even earlier than that though, because I was like, I got to get this guy, right? That was my second quarterback. So because I believe in the AFC North, and then also because of the team situations, like again, you have to sell me as you sold me already on Chris Olave, right? You got to sell me on Chris Olave, sell me on Derek Carr. I'm fucking sold. Why do I need to be sold on Chris Olave? Because it's the NFC South, right? I already love Chris Godwin. I am Chris Godwin. I made Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's my guy. I'm all in on Chris Godwin. Now I'm all in on Chris Olave because Chris Olave is very similar to Chris Godwin. And part of that is that Derek Carr just had a bad year, right? And so that team can overcome being in the NFC South. It's not an absolute death knell, right? But it would be nice to have as many guys in the AFC North and the NFC North as possible, right? Because we're going to have a lot of shootouts, a lot of teams where the offense is better than their defense, right? So, and when I look at the Steelers, I see all of these factors, all of these forces pushing up the pass attempts. And then I close my eyes and I'm like, do you really, like, what is the case against Pickett? These people, these clowns around the industry fading Kenny Pickett. Did they think Mitchell Trubisky? Are they pro Mitchell Trubisky? Like, I'm trying to get into the heads of those that are besmirching the great name of Kenneth Pickett Sr. He doesn't, there's no, I don't know if he has kids, but it's just what I call it. Because
he's old enough to have kids. He's like
and
26 already, 25.
He was a very, very, very old rookie. You're right. And it gives him the extra weight, that gravitas, which I think is important for him. He's playing with the running backs. He's in running back drills in preseason, right? In training camp. He's super leader guy in the locker room. And you think that they're going to go to Trubisky? He's out here leading the league in like under pressure pass completion percentage and catchable pass rate, as well as deep ball catchable pass rate on Player Profiler. And you're fading this guy who's going to be in all of these comeback mode fourth quarters where he was like built in a lab in college to be that comeback guy in the fourth. He did it already as a rookie where he had a big comeback in the fourth quarter. This is this in his DNA. And isn't the fourth quarter when a lot of fantasy points are scored? And so you got to explain to me how I'm not bullish on a Pat Freiermuth, bullish on a Pickens, just bullish on the Steelers, man.
So I love Pat Freiermuth. I wrote an article on the 33rd team just about like where these elite tight end seasons come from for fantasy. And one of the biggest ones was just depth chart. It's like you have to be number 1 or number 2 on the depth chart, or else you have to catch a shitload of touchdowns. I don't like to bet on the guy catching all the touchdowns. Pat Freiermuth looks like the number 2 option. I actually am not a big Pickens guy, and it's purely because Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth's targets per route run were like 50% higher last year than George Pickens. Pickens might improve there. He was 1 year removed from the ACL tear. So like I'm willing to hear that he's going to be better.
Oh yeah, well
But
he was a rookie.
it's
He's going to be better. He was not bad last year. He was
No, he
much
wasn't
more
bad.
productive than say Skyy Moore and all these other rookies. He was the equal of a Drake London, right? In terms of fantasy
it's just
points
the
per game.
situation. Like
Yeah,
I
the
think the
situation's
Steelers'
better
passing
than
offense
Drake
is much
London's.
better.
We
So I
just
think
talked about it. We talked about it like I think it was probably 3 hours ago that we talked about
Yeah.
it. We both agree that we could look up and Pickens probably going to outscore Drake London.
I could definitely see that. I just worry when I think there's two players that are going to out target him. And I like the Steelers as an undervalued offense. This is not, I don't want to like kid ourselves. This is not going to be like a top 10 passing offense. I think it's going to be closer to league average, which like for Kenny Pickett in fantasy points, if it's a league average offense and he runs and he goes extremely late, that's awesome. I would rather take Freiermuth and then just Deontay because of targets. Freiermuth's yards per route run was 5th among tight ends, even though the offense stunk last year. And if you adjust it for his offense, Freiermuth's yards per route run was 1.76. Deontay and Pickens were at 1.45, 1.44. So he was way more efficient per route than those two. And only Mark Andrews had a higher target share on a higher depth of target than Freiermuth. So Freiermuth had like this breakout season last year, but because he scored 7 touchdowns as a rookie and then 2 last year, I don't think people quite realize that as a target earner, he took a huge step forward. Pickens, I'm not fully fading Pickens because again, like another year removed from the ACL tear, but I would say that I definitely have more Deontay and more Freiermuth just because I'm more confident in them earning targets. Whereas with Pickens, it's not even like he has to pass one. Like ideally he's number 1 on the team in targets, but that would then require him to like pass 2 guys that he was.
Yeah, I think he can pass
Freiermuth.
I think he can pass Freiermuth, but I think they could be similar. Freiermuth, if this is a relatively prolific offense, because again, it's the AFC North, and they're going to have to throw to be in these games, and there's going to be games they're not in, and they're just in garbage time. Can I make you very happy right now? I'm going to take my Scott Fish Bowl draft at the 108. Justin Herbert went 107. It was all quarterbacks with the exception of Kelsey. So I either could have drafted, say, Lawrence or Fields, or I could have decided to draft a receiver. I drafted, as the first receiver off the board, Ja'Marr Chase.
I'm very happy there. That's my wide receiver 1 as well.
He's the wide receiver 1.
This is the people that have Jefferson ahead of Chase, I think are looking at just like fantasy points, which is kind of weird. What I like to look at is we talked about like Kupp and Jefferson and why I like Jefferson a little more last year. I like to look at just zooming out and be like, who do I think looks like the best receiver on paper? Ja'Marr Chase was better than Jefferson as a rookie. And then in year 2, he breaks his hip. And during that season last year, had the most targets per game among all wide receivers. So it's one of the 5 fastest receivers in the NFL, probably leading the NFL in targets per game, and has less target competition than last year. Why would I not be excited about that?
You should be excited.
I feel like he should be the obvious 101. Like if anyone was going to have a 2,000 receiving, I think I said this when I was on Theo and Billy's podcast a couple months ago. I was like, don't be surprised if Chase is the first 2,000 yard receiver because we now have 17 games. And like, he's just set up to have a 30% target share in an offense we love where they're playing pretty tough opponents. They're going to have to throw each week. And the running back room has like no investment. They hate Joe Mixon. They didn't really backfill him with anybody. They got rid of Samaje Perine. Like this is Irv Smith stinks. This is an offense that's going to flow through Ja'Marr Chase. And I'm ready for it.
We should all be ready for it. So that's the reason why you have to draft Justin Jefferson at the 101 is that's the only way to get him and get exposure to him.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. Yeah,
it's a bummer, but it's what has to happen. And that way you can still get 5% Jefferson like we talked about, and then just load up on Chase at the 102, 103, 104. But in that case, if you always went Jefferson at the 101 just because, then you'd get what we talked about, the 8.3% Jefferson. But you could choose to go chase in a few of those
Mhm.
cases and push it down to 5% Jefferson. That's no problem. At the 205, Deshaun Watson. So that's where I did go quarterback, and you have to love that, right? At the 305, a wide receiver I like to call a CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb at the 305, Yep. And then at the 408, tight end, because this is a tight end premium, extra super duper premium league. And I know you don't like this guy, but George Kittle, contingent upside.
Yeah.
Contingent
I like. Yeah, I think for some of these tournament things, I think Kittle's fine. I don't love him in like a standard managed league, just because I think more often than not he lets you down. Fishbowl is 3,300 person tournament. Kittle generally is pretty good with fantasy points a game. And you talked about the premium. The way I like to put it is, if a tight end has a 10-yard first down reception, that's 5 points. 2 points for the reception, 2 points for the first down, 1 point for the yardage. It's absolutely insane that a tight end can have a first down catch for 5 points. So I can't hate any of these early tight ends. Tight end was the one position I punted in the fishbowl. I kept thinking I was going to get a guy. We're going to roll with Kincaid, which is a little terrifying.
I punted running back. I'm rolling with Antonio Gibson, so you can't. I can't. We're all in that situation.
Running back,
super flex. You have to make a decision, be weak somewhere.
My running backs are awesome. I have Breece Hall, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, Travis Etienne.
Whoa!
I'm loaded.
Whoa! You've got a bunch of great running backs and DeAndre Swift.
Yeah. So a really, really, really great team there. I've got Quentin Johnston on that team.
Oh my God!
What?
You've probably got a bunch of good receivers in Quentin Johnston as well.
Yeah, Calvin Ridley's on that team. Ridley, very good receiver.
Wow. Okay, so let's go back to my team real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, keep going.
I don't want to. I don't want to. If you say one more receiver I don't like, I might not like your team, and I don't want to. want to get to that.
So, all right. So just to give their listeners a recap, we have Chase, Sean Watson, CeeDee Lamb. All right. George Kittle.
George Kittle. Okay, in the 5th round, that's when I went Kenneth Pickett. I had no idea. I did not check the ADP. I did not know he was going later than that.
You should have gone round 5. That's fine. Yeah.
I thought that's where he should go. I didn't know people were getting him in round freaking 8. Okay.
No, I would take him around 5.
So, because again, the public, it's not the public. It's actually fantasy analysts. Like, I've heard some of these fantasy analysts, the way they talk about him, like he's going to lose his job to mature. It's crazy. So, and then 608, this was all to give me the opportunity to tell you at the 608, of course, I stacked Mr. Pickett with Mr. Freiermuth. Hey, there you go.
Freiermuth's so good in this format.
Right there.
The target earning tight end. Yeah, he's going to outscore a lot of these like high end wide receiver 2 types in this format. He was actually the guy I was hoping to get. And then I was hoping to get Higbee, because I was like,
underrated.
Higbee's going to get just a ton of targets.
Underrated.
And he would be really good in that format as well, because I just wanted target earners. I didn't care really about the offense, about touchdowns. I was like, just give me targets. But yeah, I missed on those guys. And then we just kept kicking the can, and Kincaid joined the roster. And then I think Tyler Conklin, I don't remember. It was, my tight end room is one of probably like the 10 worst in that tournament. It's scary.
Billy's always like saying to me, hey, I know it's gross, but hear me out on Marvin Jones. I know it's gross, but hear me out on Tyler Higbee.
Jones, yeah.
You know, he's like, team situation, the target share, all this stuff. And, like we talk about with the Rams, their defense is going to be terrible. They're going to have to be throwing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, Higbee could have like 120 targets. Terrible offensive line, terrible defense. There's going to be a lot of quick passes to Higbee. And PPR, I'm ready for it.
Are you ready for Rachaad White?
I'm getting more ready. I was not a Rachaad White enthusiast earlier this offseason. I liked pre-draft. I thought the landing spot was kind of fun for the future. I didn't realize Brady was done. He was pretty bad last year, but I think the case for him is like the Buccaneers kind of know they're going to be bad. And it seems like they've gone out of their way to make sure Rachaad White's getting every touch. I guess like here's how I'll frame it. why would Rachaad White and Alexander Mattison go in different spots of the draft? Like wildly different spots. Mattison goes like 3 rounds earlier. And I'm not even like the biggest Rachaad White guy, but I'm like, I mean, right there, like if I need a running back, he's definitely one of like the 0 RB type guys where I'm like, wow, like I can get this guy in the 7th round. Like, okay. Like I've got 4
I'm
receivers.
in on 0 RB this year, and he is one of the reasons.
Yeah, like if you get like 4 awesome receivers for your 3 receiver spots in your flex, an elite tight end, an elite quarterback, and then your first running back is Rachaad White in round 7, I'm like, that's a great start.
Who's your favorite 4th round receiver? Because, the ability to go receiver, like through like a Chris Olave, because I know Chris Olave goes at the 2-3 turn on underdog, but in other leagues you can get him more in the mid 3rd round.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you like in the 4th round at receiver? If I'm gonna go pure 0 RB, because the tight end's there, it gets a little. You could go Hawkinson, you could go quarterback. There's some things you can do in the 4th round. It's an interesting situation. I find myself being drawn to like a Jalen Hurts if he's there.
Does he fall to the 4th? I haven't seen him quite fall that far. If he's falling there, I would take him. I think the beauty of fantasy football is like the guys that we don't like.
No, Jalen Hurts doesn't fall there. What am I, crazy?
I was a little surprised.
No. I was thinking about the 3rd round. Excuse me. He goes early 3rd round at the FFPC.
Yeah, I was going to say he goes like...
Yeah. I got the rounds confused. No, excuse me. Everybody, forget all that. Forget I said that.
That was advice for the people in the 6-team leagues.
Lamar Jackson. I meant Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I like Lamar.
Lamar Jackson's ADP because I love stacking Lamar with Zay Flowers. And one of the reasons why I love that is because it's one of the few cases where the quarterback's wide receiver 1 actually goes after he does. And then you get an automatic ADP discount. If you have Lamar, you get a discount on Zay Flowers because the demand for Zay Flowers is basically you. From at least from a stacking perspective, it's a really nice dynamic that you have there. But anyway, that was who I meant, not Jalen Hurts. So Lamar in the 4th round is sexy.
I like that. Yes.
What if I wanted to go receiver though?
So this is a guy we've always disliked, and I finally like him. Jerry Jeudy. I mentioned him a little bit before. Like, perfect. Jerry Jeudy was actually awesome last year. So
perfect.
12 games, snap share above 50%. In those games, he averaged 75 yards a game, 16 fantasy points a game, which was above Jalen Waddle. Again, Denver had the fewest points scored in the NFL last year. So like what Jeudy showed was like a borderline wide receiver 1 ceiling throughout a lot of last year. In the worst situation, I'm very excited about him. I like it can burn you where it's like another year where like, damn it, he's injured, he's banged up, he can't handle this type of volume. But I think like what we're looking for in that range is like the guys where like the floor is pretty good. Like when Judy's been healthy, like he's been the top target in that offense. And I think the ceiling is like what we started to see towards the end of last year, which is when Russ is functional, Jerry Jeudy, like he had a 3 touchdown game. He's probably not going to have one this year. That's rare, but it shows like he can. The only guys that have had 3 touchdown games are the guys, again, that have had 3 touchdown games. It's nice to know that is in his range of outcomes.
No, man, there's real upside there. There's real upside there. And that's the thing. I'm like, why would I draft Calvin Ridley when I can have Jerry Jeudy? Jerry Jeudy does not have that terrifying abyss of a floor. He's just been steadily getting better, and you know what you're getting with him. Where
contract year too.
Yeah, it's a contract year. Everything is clicking into place. It's like, no, I thought he was being drafted because of the Alabama helmet, and then I thought he was being drafted based on like this like a mind meld with he and Russ and the fit, and that he is gonna, you know what I'm saying? And there was a lot of narrative around him last year pushing him up. This year, it's just the right ADP. It's just where he should go. He's a great pick there. And I can't believe it. But I'm like, hey, if you're going to be productive and efficient, then I need to assess you differently for Dynasty, right? And so that's one of those guys that he's really gained dynasty value at Player Profiler over the last 6 months, because it's like, hey, look at these numbers from last year. Look at these peripherals. He's actually good, and this offense can't be worse. So, and there's not a lot of risk there either, right? So it seems like the risk is all baked in. There's real upside there. He seems like the guy to get in the 4th round.
And he's still super young too. Like, people have to remember that this guy's 24. It feels like he's been around for a while, but again, it's like, would it be the craziest thing if this guy, like at 24 years old, suddenly becomes a fantasy star? No. Round 1 pick. Has always been like pretty good with target share, etc. So I think that's really good. One thing that I do love is that his reception perception was terrible, and everyone was like, oh my God, like Jerry Jeudy's not a good route runner. I think Matt Harmon does great work, but I think like the caveat with like the Broncos is part of reception perception and stuff like that is going to be scheme. And like the scheme was awful. Anyone that watched Broncos football, which I moved to Denver last year, so I had to watch Broncos football. Like, this was the worst run offense in the NFL. So Jerry Jeudy not getting open, like, part of that is on him, but a large part of that is like, this was a terrible scheme. They didn't know what to do. No one was ever healthy. So it was often Jeudy attracting pretty intense coverage when he's not even on the same page as Russ. Nathaniel Hackett's fired midseason. Like, so many things went wrong that I'm like, I'm willing to forgive Jeudy for not getting open as much as some people hoped, given like every other outside factor. And I'm like,
top
hey,
10 yards per target. But his route win rate was number 88. Like, his 34% route win rate was as low as it gets for qualified receivers, which is a reception perception type statistic that we do, where we look at every route a guy runs and say, hey, did this guy create separation? Did this guy create a throw window? And the fact that he did it so rarely is crazy. His target separation tells the story. It was 1.5 yards of target separation. The guy wasn't getting the target separation last year. But here's the thing. There's one, when we zoom out and you actually think about like who this player is, the one thing we know about Jerry Jeudy is he is a good route runner. That's not like up for, there's all these other things about him, durability and explosiveness and yak and all these things where it is a question, right? That's not a question, right? Verticality, all these things, even his hands are sometimes shaky.
Yeah.
His ability to gain horizontal separation is not up for debate. Okay, so if he happened to have an unlucky season with the advanced metrics, that's allowed. That's the crazy thing. It's like, I'm, for the first time after almost 10 years of doing this, appreciating how likely it actually is to have a super fortunate outlier advanced metrics based season. And on the flip side, it's also possible for Jerry Jeudy to have a very unlucky advanced metrics season. It's possible.
Yeah, like if
when it flies in the face of what you know to be true, like first principles, Jerry Jeudy is a good route runner, then like the bar to prove that he is a bad route runner is actually more than one season of win rate.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if year after year he's terrible, it's like, all right, well, maybe like he's actually not a good route runner. But again, this was the lowest scoring offense in the entire NFL, and he was still starting for you in fantasy football. I don't know what more needs to be said.
I mean,
like,
John Westdoffer is in the chat. Hi, John. I thought that people might just not stick around. There's the live stream is just growing and growing and growing and growing in popularity. Now there's like well over 100 people. He writes, I think Jerry Jeudy needs a fresh start. Hey, John, I got a news flash for you, buddy. Let's run the breaking news. We're going to run the breaking news for John because John needs to hear this. Hey, John, he got a fresh start. It started last year. They fired the coach. You know that? They brought in Sean Payton. They traded a goddamn first-round pick for him. They traded a first-rounder for a guy that doesn't play football to give Jerry Jeudy a fresh start. That was the whole point. He did get a fresh start. That's what this is. It's a totally fresh start. So what are you talking about? Jerry Jeudy needs a fresh start. I don't know why I'm so mad. I shouldn't be that mad about this. There's no reason to be mad about that.
Yeah, I think John's question's fair, but I would side with what you said. It's a fresh start, new head coach. Russell Wilson, I think, is going to bounce back quite a bit, considering like Nathaniel Hackett kind of tried to make him Aaron Rodgers, which is pretty hilarious when you look at the two of them and they're not the same size. They don't have the same skill set. They're good quarterbacks, and that's about it. Like there's nothing else in common. So
we've got a guy on Twitch. We're live on Twitch. And there's a guy on Twitch, Singuista, is on. He says, I'm still the only one here on Twitch. Hey man, that's one more than we usually get. So that's fine. I'm happy with that. I'm very happy with that, Singuista. Great job. Keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Skyy Moore, you were high on him last year. You basically looked at the target share math and you're like, hey, Skyy Moore, he was a second-round pick. He was productive.
Yeah.
He's one of the very few, non-Power 5 conference juniors to come out ever. Like going back to Devontae Adams. Yeah. It's impressive.
Yeah, he was
super impressive prospect. It did seem like if you didn't think Juju would fire, that Skyy Moore would be next man up. Juju technically didn't fire. Juju was bad last year with Patrick Mahomes, which is a glaring indictment for his career, and I'm surprised he's still in the league. So now you're seeing one of the great ADP explosions, one of the fastest risers in the these underdog tournaments have been going on from the winter through the spring into the summer. And then so to see this ADP change on a Kadarius Toney injury doesn't explain it. There's something else going on there where the Skyy Moore ADP is literally going to the sky. I swear, I heard he went third round in a draft.
Oh, that's what I don't like him that much. So I think with the Toney injury, we should push Skyy Moore way up.
But Toney was already bad.
But not
Toney
because
already
of Toney injury.
Didn't matter.
So for me, it wasn't actually because Kadarius Toney got injured. It's because he got injured taking punts. And that if he's still not getting first team receiving reps and they're still putting him on special teams, they've kind of said, like, we view him as kind of a higher volume gadget guy. That's not our wide receiver.
Oh, can we do a breaking news on that? Can we do a breaking news on that? Say it again. Say it again. As if we didn't know this the last 5 years. Say it again.
So Kadarius Toney is a high volume gadget guy.
Yes!
There it is.
Like he was in Florida. Like he was in New York. Kadarius Toney, for Christ's sake. Another first-round pick who can't play football except on special teams. At least he can do that.
Yeah, Kadarius Toney is a freak.
At least he can play special teams. Some of these first-round wide receivers can't play anything.
Yeah, just put him out on special teams. A ridiculous athlete. You got to protect him from himself. Give him like 5 reps per game, 2 punt returns, 3 routes, something like that. Like, keep him comfortable. Tell him to stretch. Like someone needs to get him like a yoga gift card for his birthday. I'm convinced he doesn't stretch. It's like the Will Fuller all over again. Like, hyper talented at times. For some reason, like, does not want to touch his toes before practice. Brittle. But if we go to Skyy Moore on a serious note, Juju Smith-Schuster was like kind of good for fantasy if the touchdowns were there. 78 catches, 933 yards, and Juju stinks. He only had 3 touchdowns. But if Skyy Moore is going to be in that type of role, where I think I'm still pretty optimistic, Skyy Moore was targeted at a higher rate per route than Juju, and
that's the role we want him in,
and at a higher depth of target. So if you're telling me that he's going to be in the slot like Juju, but targeted more often and running farther down the field, and he's just better after the catch and just a better wide receiver, it's pretty easy to see like an 80 catch, 1,000-yard season from him. And people are like, well, Chiefs receivers never produced in fantasy, aside from when Tyreek Hill was always like a high-end fantasy wide receiver 1. So like Kelsey can be the tight end 1 in fantasy, and you can legally have good fantasy production from a receiver. Like, it seems to me like Skyy Moore is just set up for success this year. And he got the touchdown in the Super Bowl. They clearly like do not actually hate the guy. It's, you know what? I was a year early. Western Michigan is definitely a step down in competition compared to the NFL. So I think we should all just be in on Skyy Moore. I loved taking him at pick 180 earlier this offseason. That was fun while it lasted. Now he goes around pick 100, and I think you should still be taking him there. So,
more breaking news. Wow, we're just really breaking a lot of news here. The place to be for fantasy football, it's a very long YouTube handle, is reporting that Tony only drinks soda, doesn't drink water. So Kadarius Toney only drinks soda, not water. That's the news.
I mean, that wouldn't surprise me. He also did. I don't know, like, what's going on here. How does he not have like some kind of like publicist or like PR person who takes his phone at night? It was like we've seen this before with like politicians where it's like, you probably shouldn't be tweeting this right now.
Right.
Kadarius Toney like making like threatening videos on social media. I'm like, sometimes like just take the phone away. This isn't really like, you don't need this. Like just trust me on this one. You'll survive the night without making like a pretty outrageous statement on social media. Like him DMing people and cursing them out. He's DM'd a lot of women saying they're ugly, which like I don't know why that matters. Like he should probably be stretching. He's made a lot of videos cursing out the New York Giants. I'm just kind of like, Kadarius, your PR publicist, whoever, like someone out there needs to just take your phone at night. Like 9-10 p.m. hits, no more phone for you.
He ended up on the Chiefs. Like, he had one like, fortunate bounces in the history of the sport for a bad player. And you're a Chief. How can you be complaining? How can you be obsessing over the Giants still? Get over it. You're a Chief. Focus. Jesus Christ. It's killing me, man. He's killing me, this guy. All right. We're getting close to the end of the show, by the way. We might go 4 hours. Give me your top truther, the guy that you're not dropping, the guy that you believe in down the depth chart. I know that there's not many of these guys left because you're into guys that are good, but maybe a guy you think is actually good, just not getting the opportunity.
I'm going to sell this guy to you. You're going to know who it is pretty early on. Some of the listeners might not. You might even already know who the player is, just guessing, but. So we'll start with the rosy light. The name's going to be depressing, but I cannot drop this guy in Dynasty. So if we look at receivers with at least 200 snaps last year, this player was number 1 in targets per route run, targeted on 39% of his routes. He was number 1 in yards per route run at 3.3. He had 100 targets in his second season. He's still 24 years old. This sounds like a great player. He's free in Dynasty. Again, 24 years old. He now has
100 targets. He had 100 targets
in his second season. Yeah, I still think there's a chance that he's in the 2021 Cordell Patterson role this year. Cordell Patterson was very, very fantasy relevant. This player, I have not forgotten. I will continue to truth her for Laviska Shenault.
Oh,
the dream is not dead. He's apparently being used out of the backfield pretty intensely, and I think that's his best use. A high volume player, manufactured touches like Cordell Patterson, where you go, hey, he's big and he's fast. He makes guys miss. Why are we forcing him to run receiver routes? I mean, it's not like the Panthers depth chart's insurmountable. We both think Bryce Young can be really, really good, which would help. As you always say, like the rising tide lifts the boats.
That's right. And listen, man, it's Miles Sanders, last time I checked, had the weakest ankles in the NFL.
I don't understand the Miles Sanders hype. People are like, Miles Sanders is going to be a bell cow. And I'm like, that's very interesting because the last time I checked, he lost receiving work because he couldn't pass block. You think their 200-pound soaking wet quarterback is going to take a hit because Miles Sanders doesn't pass block? And they're like, you know what? Put Miles Sanders back out there. We need him to give the people fantasy points.
They needed Miles Sanders so much they decided not to use him in the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't understand what's going on. I'm like, people are like Miles Sanders last year, and I'm like, yeah, behind the best offensive line with 11 rushing touchdowns, Miles Sanders in half PPR was RB16, in full PPR was RB22 per game.
Yeah, he was number 5 in carries though.
Yeah, he's drafted like at his Eagles ceiling this year. The Panthers.
It's the Panthers.
You
I don't
really
get
think,
it.
like,
Listen, I think their running game is interesting because I think that's what they're going to want to do. And in this is going to be a running division.
It just doesn't score fantasy points.
Just draft Chuba Hubbard late. You don't have to be a hero. This Chuba Hubbard actually is a better receiver than Miles Sanders. And I love LaVisca in that Cordell Patterson role because the only satellite back they have on the roster is Raheem Blackshire.
Yeah, I tweeted recently. I think Blackshear, whatever you say his name. I think he's actually like a fun sleeper.
Yeah,
because
again, it's a shallow
Sanders
depth.
and
It's a
Chuba
shallow. The larger point is the
are
shallow
like-
depth chart.
Yeah, it's a shallow depth chart. Sanders and Chuba aren't these pass blocking specialists. Blackshear actually led. I think he was on Rutgers in college. He led Rutgers one year in receptions, which is like kind of crazy. I was doing a deep dive because I was
it's
there's gotta be something going
Blackshear.
on.
Yeah, Raheem Blackshear. All apologies to
but
Raheem.
then-
I'm gonna pronounce your name right every time from now on.
Yeah, but like per carry out wide, I don't think Shenault would be that much worse than Chuba or Sanders. And I think like you can just like sling him some dump offs.
Why not?
It's not like he has bad hands for a receiver, but not bad hands like for like a receiving back type role. Like that's like Cordell Patterson. Like the guy couldn't really run his routes. Shenault couldn't really run his routes. Still managed 100 targets in year 2. We're gonna keep believing.
RB2 in
He's
fantasy.
free.
RB2 in fantasy. Right there.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think what was Shenault? Did he cap out, what is he, RB18, something like that? Cordell Patterson?
I don't remember, but he was definitely in the RB2 range.
No,
I remember I
even
made a
better.
video.
14.7 points per game. He was the
That's good.
RB16.
I remember that year 2 years ago, 2021 season at Player Profiler. I made a video after like 6 weeks. I had to pitch it to you. I was like, I want to make a 15-minute video where I deep dive into why Cordell Patterson will continue to be awesome. Because it was like 6 weeks in and people were like, there's no way this sustains.
This is
And I was like,
unsustainable. No, I'm sure
I'm
I
gonna
was
make a
like that.
video
I was that
about
guy. I was
why-
like, go get out of here. This is a gadget guy.
And I looked, and every other snap he got a touch through like those 6 weeks, and I was like, you know what? He's gonna earn more snaps. Yes, the regression for touches is coming per snap, but again, like he's getting a touch every other snap. They're like designing their offense around him. It was the craziest thing, and sure enough, he was still really good for the rest of the season because
Super
like
cool.
they did everything in their power to get him the ball. Carolina, I know you like Terrace Marshall late. I like him late too. But again, like there's nobody in Carolina that is so obviously like the guy in this past game.
I mean, I
Shenault
like
could
Terrace
just, like,
Marshall like
sneak
in the
in there.
last round, you know?
Yeah.
Because he's not playing with the ones in camp. He's not developing that rapport with Bryce Young. They're throwing Mingo out there, and Mingo's dropping passes. Like, I get it. Mingo's playing X, and he's being just terrible. But they're like, we're committed. We're pot committed to this guy. We drafted him in the early second round. We got to put him out there with the ones, and we just signed and brought this veteran over. We owe Adam Thielen these snaps, right? And then it's like, sorry, Terrace Marshall, you're going to have to run with the twos. But he's going to be running with the ones as soon as Mingo frustrates the coaches to the point where they're like, we got to get him out of there. We just vaudevillian Kane for Mingo. So you can always pick up Marshall probably after week 2, 3, where he starts, the snap share starts to go up. So he's not a guy you need to draft, but I do think that he's very worthy of a final round pick on Underdog in particular. I think that Marshall's worthy.
Yeah, I would agree there. Good prospect profile. He had a few good weeks last year. And again, it's a terrible depth chart. And we like Bryce Young, and we like the offensive line. So there someone could emerge. It might just be like wide
If a
receiver by
rookie
committee,
is going
but-
to play well as a rookie, it is because
Bryce
he has a
Young.
good offensive line. See Brock Purdy.
Yep. Yeah, Bryce Young's got the great offensive line, and he's a hyper fast processor. So if those receivers ever get an inch of separation, he's probably going to see it. So it's not like I love any of the individual receivers, but I think like it's easier to see the path for him than like Stroud in year 1.
It's all these guys, man. It's tough. It's rookie quarterbacks. All right. Get you out of here, man. Bold prediction. Here we go.
So through 4 seasons, I'm thinking of a running back who's averaged 230 carries, 40 receptions, over 1,200 yards per season, 7.5 touchdowns a season, at least 235 touches all 4 years of his career. He's durable. He just signed a 3-year deal this offseason, $11 million in guarantees. We like that. That's a good investment at running back. He shares a backfield with a guy that he's 25 pounds heavier than. We like that. He's going to get the goal line carries. I recently, on Monday, talked with NFL insider Ari Meirov on my podcast, and he said, quote, the sub 200-pound back is going to be used as a receiving weapon all around the field. And he said, quote, this mystery running back will be the bell cow.
Can I
running
guess?
back is available. Yes.
No. Am I allowed to guess?
No, yeah. I'll let you get. I got a couple more, and then I'll keep revving.
Sorry, I didn't mean. God, I'm ruining it. God damn it! I'm so sorry. I'm ruining it. Keep going. Can I get? Just give me a spot to guess before you say it,
and I'll be like, yes, yeah. I have it planned. He goes around 7 fantasy drafts. He's going to get 250 to 300 touches behind a top 3 offensive line, by far the best offensive line of his career, in the offense that had the most total fantasy points among all backfields in 2022 on the NFL's 5th highest scoring offense from last season. His quarterback can't move and has a love affair with the check down. In 2023, the top 12 fantasy running back will be
David Montgomery!
That was a great tag team.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.